Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another scary story. Your place where we uncover the darkest mysteries in a calming and reflective way. For the next hour, I want you to put on your earphones, put your phone face down, and close your eyes. Relax, and let this story take you to a world full of chills and mystery. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, leave a comment sharing where in the world you're listening from. Now get comfortable and relax. I used to think the stories were just small-town folklore, tales told by people with too much time and too little sense. Ravenswood, West Virginia isn't on any map that matters. We had more cows than people, more cornfields than concrete, and more secrets than anyone wanted to admit. It was one of those places where the mountains felt too close, the trees leaned in too far, and the silence at night wasn't peace. It was pressure. I grew up on a patch of land just outside town. My dad, Thomas Mercer, was a retired Marine, hard-edged, hard-working, and hard to impress. He didn't believe in ghosts or UFOs or any of that tinfoil hat nonsense, as he liked to call it. If something couldn't be held, built, or broken, it didn't exist in his world. My younger sister Claire, though, she was different. Sensitive, curious. She used to stand at the kitchen window for hours staring out at the cornfield, convinced there were little men hiding between the rows. She said she saw them sometimes, gray, short, staring right back at her. Dad would tell her to knock it off, but I'd catch him looking too. Just for a second, when he thought no one was, watching. The truth is, Ravenswood had always been strange. My entire childhood was threaded with stories passed between whispers, of people going missing after sundown, lights rising from the woods, and cows found in the fields with their organs surgically removed. But nobody ever said anything in the daylight. And if you brought it up, they'd laugh, then quickly change the subject. I remember the pastor once warning folks not to give it power by speaking it aloud. That stuck with me. By the time I turned 19, I'd mostly tuned it all out. I worked mornings at the feed store and spent my nights helping Dad around the property. Nothing out of the ordinary unless you count the random power outages, the dogs barking at nothing, or the occasional noise in the woods that sounded too mechanical. I chalked it up to paranoia. You grow up in a place like this, your brain starts playing tricks on you. But something changed that spring. The nights got quieter. Too quiet. The dogs, we had 3 at the time, started refusing to go outside after dark. They'd whine at the door, tails between their legs, ears back. And every now and then, I'd wake up with dirt on my feet. I'd ask Claire if she was messing with me. She swore she wasn't. On June 8th, 2014, I went to bed like any other night. We'd just put up new fencing along the north property line, and my arms were sore from digging post holes. Dad turned in early. Claire was in her room with headphones on, working on one of her weird little paintings. The house was still. Safe. At least it seemed that way. That was the last normal night of my life. I didn't know it at the time, but something had been watching us. Waiting. I can't explain how I knew. It was a gut feeling. Like a storm you can smell before you see the clouds. And that night, the storm finally arrived. I wouldn't dream. I wouldn't sleep. I would wake up, already standing, under a sky that didn't look like ours. And nothing in my life would ever be the same. Came to in the middle of the night, but not in my bed. I wasn't dreaming. I knew that right away because my feet were freezing, the grass was wet, and I could feel every pebble under my soles. I was standing in the backyard, facing the woods, wearing only a t-shirt and the sweatpants I'd gone to bed in. The air was wrong, too still. No wind, no insects. Just heavy silence, like the entire world was waiting for something. I remember the stars being so sharp they almost hurt to look at. And then I realized my arms were hanging at my sides, useless, like they weren't mine anymore. I tried to speak, to call out, but nothing came. My mouth opened, but my throat stayed locked. I wasn't walking, I was being moved. My legs shuffled forward, slow and steady. I wasn't choosing where to go, I was just going. Then I heard them, the dogs, They weren't barking. They were howling, screaming like something had a hold on them. That sound, it went right through me. I wanted to run toward it, to find them, to help, but my body didn't listen. The tree line glowed. It started as a faint pulse, a dull blue light bleeding through the gaps in the trees. With each step I took, the glow grew stronger, more vibrant.
Most like it was brain. I got meat left all in this.
My stomach turned, and then I saw it. Nestled in a small clearing just beyond the tree line hovered a sphere. Flawless, smooth, metallic. It didn't have seams or doors. It just hovered there, about 4 feet off the ground, completely still, not even disturbing the leaves around it. The air around the thing shimmered, like heat waves rising off pavement. I wanted to scream. I wanted to fall to my knees, bury my face in the dirt, pretend I hadn't seen it. But I couldn't. My body kept moving, carrying me closer. Then they came. 2 figures emerged from the woods. Not from the craft, from the trees, like they'd been waiting there the whole time. They weren't tall, maybe 4 feet tops. Thin, frail-looking almost, but they moved with this grace that didn't seem real. Their skin was gray, like old, concrete, and their arms hung too long, nearly to their knees. No mouths, no ears, just those eyes. Huge, black, no whites, no pupils, just voids. One of them tilted its head when it saw me, and I felt it, like something slipped behind my eyes. Not pain, not pressure, but presence. Like I wasn't alone in my head anymore. And then came the voice. Not out loud, not with sound. It was inside me. Not words either, just a meaning, perfectly clear. Come, and I did. I stepped forward into that impossible light, into the humming air that made my teeth ache. My body stopped at the edge of the sphere. The metal rippled like water. A doorway appeared. That hadn't been there a second before. Inside was darkness, cold, complete darkness. I didn't fight it. I didn't panic, because I couldn't. My fear was gone, replaced by this hollow calm, like I was floating inside my own skin. I stepped through. The doorway vanished behind me, and then everything I knew disappeared. The first thing I noticed was the cold. Not the kind of cold that makes you shiver or pulls goosebumps from your skin. This was deeper. Like the air had been drained of warmth altogether, like stepping into a vacuum. The space inside the craft was wrong. I don't know how else to say it. Bigger than it should have been. Like I was standing in a room that didn't obey the rules of size or shape. The walls curved and shimmered like mercury under a thin film of glass. They weren't made of metal, not exactly. More like something alive pretending to be metal. The surface pulsed in places, dim veins of light moving just beneath. There was no sound, no buzzing, no breathing, no hum. It was like being submerged in heavy silence, and that silence had weight. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, too fast and too loud, but even that didn't feel like it belonged to me anymore. 3 of them now, not 2. The third had been waiting. Taller than the others, thinner. Its skin was a shade darker, its limbs more angular. If I had to describe it in human terms, I'd say it looked older. Not aged, worn. Like something that had been used too many times and still kept going. They didn't touch me. But I moved anyway. My legs carried me to the center of the room where a flat, raised platform waited. Almost like a table, but too low, too seamless. I wanted to stop, to turn around, to scream, but nothing responded. My muscles, my breath, even my thoughts were coated in that same heavy calm. I lay down without being asked. The surface of the table shifted beneath me, cool, smooth, and slightly soft, like skin stretched over steel. The taller one leaned over me. It didn't blink. None of them ever did. Its hand, if you could call it that, moved slowly toward my arm. Long fingers, too many joints, Then came the needle. It wasn't metal. Looked more like glass or crystal, impossibly thin and vibrating slightly even before it touched me. When it pressed against my forearm, I didn't feel pain. I felt nothing. No sting, no prick, just pressure. Then a strange warmth, like my skin was being unzipped. I looked down and saw my arm open up, like wet paper peeling back, revealing what looked like glowing tissue underneath. I should have passed out. Should have screamed bloody murder, but I couldn't even flinch. Another figure appeared behind the tall one and reached toward my face. I remember its fingers brushing my temple, then tilting my head gently to the side. That's when I felt it, something moving inside my eye. It started as a tickle, then a sharp burn, like a thread being pulled through the socket. I wanted to claw at it, to scream through my clenched teeth, but I just lay there staring at the curving wall above me as something slid into my left eye. Then a sound, not external, internal. A whisper across my brain, tracking. For when we return. Return. That word, I still hear it sometimes when I'm trying to sleep. The wall in front of me lit up suddenly like a projection with no source. I saw earth, clouds, cities, oceans, then darkness, a barren landscape, rocky, red-gray, and then a structure, sharp, angles, domes, towers, a base. We make life there. The whisper again. Inside me, you will help. I didn't understand what that meant. Still don't. But the meaning wasn't vague. It was certain. Not a question, a statement, a plan. Then darkness again, complete. Not unconsciousness. Something else, like being paused, and when I woke up, really woke up, I was back in bed, and nothing was ever the same again. I woke up with the kind of jolt that comes after a fall, like I'd dropped from some great height into my own body. For a moment I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I just lay there in bed, my chest heaving, soaked in sweat. My sheets were tangled and damp, the pillow stuck to the back of my neck like I'd been running a fever. But it wasn't a fever. It was something else. The first thing I noticed was my eye. My left one. It felt dry, like it hadn't blinked all night. Throbbing, sharp around the socket. Not a headache, something more specific, deep and mechanical. When I sat up and blinked against the light from the hallway, I could tell something was off. The way the light entered that eye, it was delayed, like the pupil didn't know what to do with it. The second thing I noticed was the time. AM, that burned itself into me. I don't know why, but it did. Later, when I looked it up, some sites said repeating numbers meant alignment or cosmic attention. Seemed like a stretch. But the truth is, it wasn't the first time I'd seen it. 4:44 had started, showing up on clocks, receipts, even license plates long before that night. I just hadn't thought much of it. Coincidence. That's what I told myself. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and felt something odd beneath my heel. Dirt. Actual clumps of soil pressed into the wood floor. I checked my feet. They were filthy. That's when I really started to panic. I rushed to the bathroom, flipped on the light, and stared at myself in the mirror. My face looked pale, drawn, like I hadn't slept in days. But my left eye, that was what stopped me cold. It wasn't red or bloodshot. It looked wrong. The iris was just a hair off in color, duller somehow. The pupil took longer to contract under the light. And deeper than that, there was a shimmer like something metallic just below the surface. Like it was watching me from inside. I started rubbing at it, hard, until tears streamed down my face. I wanted to claw it out, but I didn't. I couldn't. I was too scared of what I might find. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, measured, heavy. I turned. My dad was standing in the doorway, shirtless, barefoot, a .45 in one hand. His face was pale, drawn. His mouth worked before he spoke, like he was trying to find the right words. "The dogs are gone," he said. I stared at him. What? He didn't answer right away. Just stood there staring at the floor like he couldn't believe the words coming out of his mouth. All three. The kennels open. No signs of a struggle. No barking. No tracks. Just gone. I didn't know what to say. I didn't trust my voice anyway. I just nodded. Claire came out of her room a few minutes later, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. She didn't say anything either. She just looked at me with this quiet understanding in her eyes, like she'd been waiting for this. She pointed to the picture she'd drawn the night before. It was crude, childlike in its style, but clear as day. 3 figures standing in a field, a sphere hovering above them, a beam of light. She didn't need to say anything. They were real, and they had come for me, and something told me this wasn't over. It's been almost 9 years since that night. I've tried everything to convince myself it wasn't real. Therapy, journaling, sleep studies. I even let a neurologist scan my brain once after I blacked out behind the wheel for 4 straight minutes on the I-79 outside Clarksburg. He didn't find anything. Stress, he said. Maybe mild dissociation. But he didn't see what I saw. He didn't wake up with dirt under his fingernails and a buzzing in his skull like a tuning fork stuck behind the eye. After the incident, we all changed. My dad stopped going into town. He still worked the property, kept to himself, but he never went near the tree line again, not once. He set up motion-activated floodlights along the back edge of the cornfield, even wired up an old marine radio tower we kept in the barn, always kept it powered, scanning dead air. I'd hear the static drifting from the barn when I visited. Claire stopped painting. Whatever she saw, whatever she remembered, she locked it away tight. She moved to North Carolina a few years later and never came back, not even when Dad passed. She left me a note once. They're still out there. Don't ever stop listening. I stayed, mostly because I didn't know how to leave. The dogs were never found, not even a trace. No blood, no prints. Just empty collars laid out on the porch like someone had set them there. For a while, nothing else happened. Months passed. I tried to fall back into routine, working odd jobs, keeping the house up, drinking too much. But the quiet was worse. Then the noise. It made you think maybe it hadn't happened, that you were just crazy. Until the dreams came. They weren't dreams exactly. More like memories being restitched wrong. I'd wake up paralyzed, drenched in sweat, and feel like the air in the room wasn't mine, like someone else was breathing with me, watching. The worst ones were the ones that ended in light, that blue light pulsing behind my eyes even with the room dark. I'd wake up with my left eye wide open, unblinking. I stopped sleeping with the lights off, started keeping my phone camera pointed at my bed while I slept. One night, the footage cut out for exactly 17 minutes at 2:17 a.m. Same time I vanished that first night. The next morning, the skin on my forearm, where they'd opened me, was irritated, red and inflamed, like something under it had been activated. It still hasn't healed right. Some nights it itches so bad I draw blood scratching at it. Doctors don't know what it is. They call it idiopathic dermal thickening. Whatever that means. Last month I woke up in the backyard again, barefoot, mud-caked, and not alone. There were prints in the dirt around me, small, too narrow for a human foot, deep, like something heavy had stood just inches from me. The corn behind. The house had been flattened in a spiral, almost perfect in its shape. No broken stalks, just pressed down like it had been ironed, and there, burned into the center, was 444. The exact time I'd opened my eyes. I don't talk to people about this anymore. Not in person. You bring up stuff like this in Ravenswood, and you get one of 2 reactions. People laugh, or they shut down. Nobody asks questions. Nobody wants answers. But I know the truth. They never left. I was marked. Branded in a way nobody can see unless they're looking for it. And I feel it. Closer every year. The pressure. The static in my eye, the dreams. Sometimes, I catch my reflection lagging behind in the mirror. Just a fraction of a second, like it's buffering, like something's on the other side trying to get back in sync. So I don't sleep much anymore. I watch the skies. I listen to the static. I track the dreams because they're coming back. And next time, I don't think they'll bring me home. People always think the scariest part of the woods is getting lost. It's not. It's realizing you're not alone when you're damn sure you should be. 5 years ago, I was 23, cocky and chasing thrills like most guys my age. Me and my 3 closest friends, Dylan, Rachel, and Tyler, had this tradition of camping together every fall. Just us, a couple tents, too much whiskey, and the illusion that we were invincible. We met in college, bonded over dumb late-night dares and horror movies, so naturally, when Dylan dared us to go to Black Hollow, we were all in. Black Hollow wasn't on most maps. It sat in a forgotten corner of Vermont near the Canadian border, past Birchwood, a town that barely had a gas station and a bar. Locals had this quiet way of talking about the place. You'd ask for directions, and they'd suddenly remember chores they had to do. That kind of silence stays with you. There were signs, too. Actual metal ones nailed to trees. No trespassing. Dangerous terrain. Handwritten ones, too. More desperate looking. Stuff like turn back and they're not voices. But we laughed. Took selfies with them. Tyler joked we'd post them on Halloween with creepy captions. Dylan even brought a cheap camcorder saying we could make a fake Blair Witch sequel. We parked the Jeep off a dirt road where the gravel just stopped. From there, we hiked about 2 miles in with our gear. The forest was thicker than I expected. Real old growth stuff. Pines that scraped the sky and underbrush that snagged your legs with every step. Our GPS glitched out within the first half hour. No signal, no compass. Dylan thought it was hilarious. We found a clearing by sunset. It had this weird stillness to it, like the trees were leaning in just a little too close. There were no bugs chirping, no rustling leaves, not even wind. Just silence. Rachel didn't like it. She kept rubbing her arms and muttering that it didn't feel right. I brushed it off as nerves. By 10 p.m. we had the fire going, hot dogs roasted, and whiskey passed around. Dylan was telling this story about some park ranger who went missing in Black Hollow back in the 80s, supposedly. Found weeks later with his tongue missing and eyes wide open like he'd died terrified. Classic Dylan nonsense. Then the fire cracked louder than it should have and we all jumped. Dylan laughed. Rachel didn't. I swear, she said, staring into the trees. I heard something. We went quiet, listening. That's when I heard. It too, something moving in the brush, not a squirrel, not wind, something heavier. Slow, deliberate. Tyler stood up. Probably a deer, he said, like saying it out loud would make it true. Then we heard it. A giggle. High-pitched. Playful. Definitely a child. Rachel's face went pale. There's no kids out here. The sound came again, only now it was bouncing around us, like the trees were throwing it back and forth. Too perfect to be natural. Too wrong to ignore. Tyler forced a laugh. Probably just an owl. Then a whisper drifted out of the dark, so close I swear I felt it brush my ear. Help me. That's when the fire felt too small. The forest felt too big. And for the first time I saw real fear in Dylan's eyes. That's when everything started to go wrong. I remember the way Dylan stood up, like he was trying to act brave, but his legs didn't quite believe the performance. He clicked on his flashlight, the old kind with a thick yellow beam, and pointed it toward the trees. Probably some lost hiker, he said, but even he didn't sound convinced. Dylan, come on, I told him. That didn't sound like a person. He gave me this look like I was being ridiculous, but it was the kind of look someone gives when they're trying to convince themselves, not you. Rachel stood too. Jake's right, she said. That wasn't normal. Something's off here. But Dylan was already walking. He aimed the light toward where we thought the sound had come from. His steps crunched through the leaves, and then he disappeared into the dark. "Dylan." Rachel called after him. No answer. We waited, me, Rachel, and Tyler, huddled near the fire like it was the only thing holding back the night. It must have been 30 seconds, maybe a full minute, long enough for the silence to feel like it was crawling into our bones. Then we heard movement, but it wasn't coming from where Dylan had gone. It was behind us. All three of us turned at the same time. Tyler shined his phone flashlight in a wide arc, hands shaking. Nothing. Then came the giggle again. Closer. Like, right behind the nearest tree. Rachel whispered, "That's not him." I don't know what got into Tyler, but he grabbed one of the campfire pokers and started yelling, "Okay, whoever's screwing with us, not funny." No response. We waited. 5 minutes. 10. Still no sign of Dylan. I checked my phone. No service, but the time said 11:34 p.m. We had last seen him around 11:23. Rachel started crying, and then footsteps, heavy ones coming from the same direction. Dylan had gone. I stood up, heart racing, staring into the darkness. That's when Dylan stepped into the light. But something was wrong. He looked wet, like he'd fallen into a creek, except there wasn't any water nearby. His hoodie and jeans clung to him like they were soaked in something thicker than water. His skin looked pale. Not just pale, washed out like all the color had drained from his face. He stumbled forward like his legs weren't working quite right. "Where the hell were you?" Tyler asked, stepping toward him. Dylan blinked, slow. "I wasn't gone," he said softly. I just turned around." I glanced at Rachel. Her hand was covering her mouth. "Dude," I said, "you were gone almost 15 minutes. He looked down at his watch and frowned. "It says 11:23. I stepped closer. The watch face was cracked, frozen on the exact time he'd left. We didn't say anything for a long minute. That's when I saw it, on his hands. Something dark smeared along the sides of his fingers. Not mud, not blood either. It was thicker, almost tar-like, and it smelled sweet, in a rotten kind of way. "Are you hurt?" I asked. He looked at me like he didn't understand the question. "I don't know. We didn't sleep that night. We just sat around the fire, not talking, barely blinking." Dylan didn't say another word. He just stared into the flames like if he looked away, something would come for him again. I don't think any of us truly understood it yet, but something in that forest had touched Dylan. And whatever it was, it wasn't done with us. We didn't speak much the next morning. Rachel had barely closed her eyes. She'd spent the night tucked inside her sleeping bag, back against a tree, wide awake. Tyler eventually dozed off, sitting upright, his head against his backpack. I just stared at the embers, watching them pulse and fade, like a heartbeat winding down. Dylan never moved. He sat near the cold ashes, still wrapped in that soaked hoodie, his eyes unfocused. I don't think he slept at all. His skin had this dull gray look, like he'd been outside in the dead of winter without a jacket. His lips were pale. His hands were clean now, we all noticed that. Too clean. Like he'd scrubbed them with sandpaper. The knuckles were red, almost raw. We packed in silence. Tyler kept checking his phone. Still no signal. GPS still spinning like it was drunk. Rachel quietly said, "We need to get out of here now." Dylan didn't argue. He didn't say anything. We took the trail back the way we came. At least we thought we did. But an hour in, nothing looked familiar. The slope of the land felt wrong, too steep. The trees were spaced differently. And that clearing where we'd stopped the first day to eat, it was just gone. "Maybe we veered off somewhere," I said. "No," Rachel said. "We didn't veer off. We're not in the same place anymore." Nobody corrected her, because deep down, we all knew it was true. The weirdest part wasn't the silence. It was the sound. Little things, faint clicking noises like teeth tapping together in the distance. the soft whoosh of branches moving when there wasn't any wind. Once I could have sworn I heard someone whisper my name behind me, but when I turned, Dylan was just staring at the trees. He hadn't said a single word since that thing brought him back. By late afternoon, we gave up trying to find the car. Tyler pulled out the backup tent and set it up in a small clearing. We were stuck there, too tired to keep walking, too lost to go forward. I volunteered to gather firewood. I didn't go far, maybe 50 feet out. I kept my eyes on camp, always, making sure I could still see the orange of Rachel's jacket or the blue of Tyler's sleeping bag. That's when I heard it again. A giggle. Like a little girl's, but not quite. Too slow, too smooth. Like someone trying to remember how a child laughs and almost getting it right. I turned around, heart hammering. Nothing. When I got back to camp, Dylan was finally talking, or sort of. He was whispering to himself. Short, broken sentences, I couldn't catch all of it, just a few words here and there. Not long. Still hungry. No names. Rachel moved to his side. "Dylan," she said gently, "can you look at me?" He blinked slowly. Then, his mouth twitched. Not a smile, just a twitch. "I didn't walk back," he said, eyes still on the trees. "I didn't walk back. It brought me." That night, we made a pact. One of us would stay awake at all times, no exceptions. We were sure of one thing now. Whatever was in Black Hollow, it waited until you were alone, until your guard was down, until you closed your eyes. I didn't sleep that night either, because Dylan kept muttering in his sleep. And sometimes, when his lips moved, I don't think it was his voice that came out. We spent the next few hours huddled around the fire. Rachel was jittery, too afraid to sleep, too afraid not to. Dylan hadn't moved from his spot near the fire. His eyes glazed over. I could see his lips move every so often, whispering something no one could quite understand.
Things of his jacket high on like it. I came about how that was that.
We were lost. It wasn't just the way the trees bent wrong or how the animals sounded distorted like they were mocking us. It was the way the land felt. Thick, like it was pressing in from all sides, suffocating us slowly. The deeper we went, the more that sensation grew. Like we were walking through a place that didn't want us there. The giggle came again. That same high-pitched, unsettling sound like a child laughing just before the punchline of a bad joke. But this time, it was closer. Rachel snapped her head around, her face pale. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, her voice tight. I nodded. "Yeah, it's..." Before I could finish, Dylan stood up abruptly. His body jerked like someone was pulling strings behind his back, and he walked toward the edge of the clearing. Moving too fast, too stiff, we shouted at him to stop, but he didn't. It was like he wasn't even hearing us. His feet didn't make a sound on the ground, like he was gliding. "Dylan!" Tyler called, jumping to his feet. But it was no use. Dylan didn't even flinch. The rest of us followed him, our voices growing more frantic. We tried to catch up to him, but it was like he was slipping between the trees, too fast for us to keep up. I could see him now, his face still, expressionless, like he was already somewhere else. And then, I saw it. A figure. At first, I thought it was just a shadow in the trees, maybe a trick of the firelight, but then I saw it move. Not like an animal, not like something human. It was too smooth. Too fast. It glided almost like it wasn't fully walking, more like it was being dragged behind a current. It wasn't until it turned its head that I saw it. A face. But not Dylan's. Not even close. It was wrong. Too wide, too stretched. The eyes were too big and the mouth was too wide, stretching too far across its face. The smile, it wasn't a smile. It was something hungry, desperate, and that laugh came from it, soft and malicious, like it knew we were watching. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The air felt thick, suffocating. It stood there watching us. Then it moved. Quick, like it was testing us, waiting for a response. I could hear its feet scraping against the leaves, dragging with every step. "Dylan!" I shouted, but my voice felt small, too weak to reach him. That thing moved closer and I couldn't pull my eyes away from it. It wasn't just mimicking Dylan. It was him. It had his shape, his build, his posture. But there was something behind. Its eyes that wasn't human. Rachel screamed, the sound cutting through the air. Tyler stumbled backward, tripping over a branch and falling to the ground. But I couldn't look away. It was like I was frozen in place. Dylan, or whatever it was, took another step forward, and that's when I saw it. The thing's hand, long fingers, pale skin, reached toward the firelight. It didn't touch the flames, but it leaned in, close enough that the heat distorted its features. That's when I saw the worst part of all. It smiled. And it wasn't a smile at all. It was mocking. It was the one in control. Tyler bolted. He grabbed Rachel, dragging her with him. I snapped out of my trance and grabbed Dylan's arm, pulling him away. His body stiff, unresponsive, like he wasn't really there. The thing followed, us slower now, as if it didn't care if we escaped. We didn't stop running until we reached the edge of the woods, until we were back at the road, where the trees stopped and the air finally felt normal again. We didn't talk. We didn't look back. We just got in the car, slammed the doors, and drove. None of us said a word on the way back. The radio played softly, filling the silence, but no one was listening. I still hear it sometimes. The laugh. It's faint, like it's just beyond the reach of the sound. But it's there. And I know deep down it's not done with us. I don't think it ever will be. The drive home was long, but not nearly as long as the hours we spent waiting for the darkness to leave us. When we pulled into my driveway, it felt like we had crossed some invisible threshold, leaving the woods behind. But the woods didn't leave us. It had been 4 days since we got back, and I still couldn't sleep. Rachel and Tyler weren't talking much either. They'd turned quiet, distant, like they were still in the woods, just waiting for something to happen. But it wasn't just them. It was me, too. There was an unease deep inside me, something I couldn't shake. I kept hearing that laugh in my head, faint but clear, like it was following me from place to place, just waiting for me to listen. The thing that looked like Dylan, it wasn't a shadow of him. It was something else, something twisted. And I could feel it. I could feel it waiting. And I knew one thing for sure. Dylan wasn't the same. I had tried to talk to him a few days after we returned. He looked at me when I approached him, but there was a blankness to his eyes that wasn't there before. His voice was distant, hollow. I asked him about the trip, about what he remembered, but he only shook his head and muttered something about the woods not being right. His words didn't make sense, like they were a fragmented puzzle, and he couldn't remember how to put the pieces back together. The worst part? He kept asking me if I thought the others were still out there. And every time I asked him who he meant, his answer changed. "The people we saw," he'd say, his voice low, shaky. "The ones in the trees. They're still out there, watching." I tried to make sense of it all, but it wasn't possible. Dylan had been gone for 20 minutes. 20 minutes where we couldn't explain what happened, what touched him. And now it was like whatever happened to him in those woods was still there, still living inside him. A darkness had attached itself to him like a parasite. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't meant to leave that place, that whatever we saw in Black Hollow had already decided our fates. But I couldn't just leave Dylan like that, not like a shell of the person we used to know. So I started to check on him more often. I'd visit him at his apartment, bring food, and try to talk. He wouldn't say much, but I knew there was something deeper, something underneath all the silence. That night was the breaking point. It was late, past midnight, and I had gone over to Dylan's place. I knocked, but no one answered. So I let myself in with the spare key. I shouldn't have. I should have turned around, but I didn't. I found him sitting on the floor, in the dark, his face pressed against the wall. He was whispering something, but I couldn't understand what he was saying. I called his name, but it was like he couldn't hear me. I stepped closer, kneeling next to him, trying to get a response. Then, in the faintest voice, he whispered, "It's here. It's in me." Before I could react, the lights flickered. The air around us grew cold, and I felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched by something far worse than we could imagine. I reached out to him, but his head jerked up, and for a brief second, I didn't see Dylan. Not really. His eyes were too wide, too hollow. He was grinning, no, smiling, but it was the wrong kind of smile. It was the same smile I'd seen in the woods. The one I'd seen on that thing. In an instant, it clicked. Whatever had taken Dylan back then had never let go. I stepped back in horror as Dylan's body twitched unnaturally. His voice came out in a twisted chorus, like it was being pulled from him, from somewhere far deeper than his throat. "Help me," he whispered, his voice splitting between his and the thing's. "Help me." The door slammed behind me, and the lights cut out completely. The room was swallowed by darkness, but I could still hear it, the faintest giggle, just barely above a whisper. And then the voice came, so clear now it felt like it was in my head. "You can't escape. You never could." I bolted from the room. I don't even remember how I managed to get out of there. I just remember running. My legs carried me outside, and I didn't stop until I was home, until I was locked inside my apartment, shaking. But the worst part? That laugh, that giggle, hasn't stopped. It's gotten louder, more real. I hear it every night, echoing through the walls, through the floors. I hear it when I'm walking alone in the streets, when I'm just trying to sleep. I hear it when I go to work, when I'm sitting at my desk. It's everywhere. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see Dylan. I see him out there in the trees, grinning, watching. I don't know if he's still alive, but I know that whatever we woke up in those woods, it's still out there, and I don't think it's ever going to let us go. December 21st, 2005. It was the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. I was 12 years old, and my family had gathered in the root cellar of my grandmother's house, the place where we told stories, though, when I look back, I can't say for certain we were ever meant to. The cellar had an oppressive feel to it, like the air was heavier down there, thick with old smells and memories. The stone walls, damp with the cold, were covered in patches of moss and the occasional cobweb, the remnants of spiders who, like the rest of us, had learned to stay in the shadows. The floor was dirt, uneven and worn smooth by time. At night, the wind outside would pick up, rattling the old wooden beams above us. The house creaked and groaned as if it were a living thing, and yet there was comfort in it. Comfort in the what? Darkness, comfort in the familiarity of my grandmother's voice, which had always seemed to make sense of the unsettling sounds around us. I remember feeling a kind of unease, even before my grandmother started talking. Maybe it was the strange tension in the air, or the way the candlelight flickered just a little too unpredictably, casting long, warped shadows on the walls. The rest of the family was there: my mother, my father, my cousins, and my aunt and uncle. They were all seated around the old oak table in the center of the cellar, the flickering candle between us, its flame dancing in the quiet. We had gathered here every year on the winter solstice. It was a tradition, though, to be honest. I didn't understand it at the time. This was the night my grandmother always told the stories that weren't meant to be shared, the ones that only came out when the night was at its darkest. Looking back, I know I should have been more scared than I was. Maybe I was just a naive child, or maybe I was too comfortable with the sense of normalcy my grandmother created with her carefully timed stories. But this year was different. This year, she spoke of the Hollow Man. I didn't think much of it at first. The Hollow Man had always been one of those strange figures in the lore of Blackwater. People talked about him in hushed tones, but it was always in the way you'd talk about an old ghost story, something that you might shudder at but dismiss the moment the fire crackled. But my grandmother wasn't telling it like a story you could laugh off. No, the way she spoke, I knew it wasn't just another old tale. "There's a rule," she said softly, her voice carrying an odd weight as if it was something she was reluctant to say, even now. "A rule we all have to follow in Blackwater." She leaned forward, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup, her eyes gleaming in the dim light. "We tell the stories. All of them." I looked around the room, my cousins and parents all squirming slightly in their chairs, unsure if they were supposed to take this seriously. But they didn't question her. Not ever. She paused, her face growing serious. "The Hollow Man comes when the stories stop." I remember the way the candlelight seemed to flicker at those words, the shadows shifting like something was watching us from the corners of the room. Even my father, who had always dismissed her tales as superstition, grew still. "When the stories stop," she continued, "he comes. And when he comes, he doesn't take your soul. He doesn't take your life. He takes your voice." I could see my cousin Maggie's eyes roll. Maggie, being the most skeptical of all of us, always had something to say when she didn't believe in something. And she made it clear now, just like she always did. "Oh, come on," Maggie scoffed. "You seriously believe in this? You think this Hollow Man is real?" Grandmother's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't raise her voice. "I'm not asking you to believe me, Maggie. I'm asking you to remember. There are some things that are better left unsaid." But Maggie wasn't listening. She laughed, dismissing the old superstition with the wave of her hand. "It's just a story. You can't seriously believe." I remember the way she stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes widened, and she pressed her lips together, as though she'd just realized she'd gone too far. But it wasn't just the words that stopped her. It was the sudden silence that seemed to fall over the room, thick and oppressive, as if the very air had turned to lead. Even the candle flame flickered one final time and then seemed to go still. No one spoke. The tension in the cellar was suffocating. 3 days later, Maggie stopped speaking entirely. At first, we thought it was a joke. It wasn't like Maggie to stay quiet. She was always the loud one, the one to have something to say about everything, even when it didn't make sense. But when my aunt and uncle realized she wasn't making a sound, when she refused to speak, even to answer simple questions, the laughter turned to concern. They took her to the doctor, of course, but the doctor couldn't find anything wrong. They ran tests, checked her for fever, for infection, for anything that could explain her sudden muteness. They couldn't find a thing, but the silence only deepened. They took her back to the hospital a second time when, during an examination, the doctors realized that Maggie's tongue was gone. It had been surgically removed. But there was no record of the procedure. No one had any explanation. There was no scar, no sign of trauma. Just an absence where something should have been. I remember my grandmother's words echoing in my mind. The Hollow Man takes voices, but the most terrifying thing wasn't just what had happened to Maggie. It was the feeling that followed. The understanding that the thing my grandmother had warned us about wasn't just a cautionary tale. It was real. That was when I learned the first rule of storytelling in Blackwater. Some stories shouldn't just be told, they should be lived, felt, and understood in ways you never expect. And when you tell them, really tell them, sometimes the things you think are just whispers from the past, things that can't hurt you, are the very things that can, and once you've spoken them aloud, they wake up. February 19th, 2010. It was snowing again. The kind of snow that blanketed the world in a dull silence where the road signs became almost invisible, and you couldn't tell where the earth ended and the sky began. I had left Blackwater for a few years, briefly moving to Halifax to pursue my studies in archives and history. But as time passed, I found myself drawn back to the town. Perhaps it was the weight of the family history, or maybe it was just that, in Blackwater, things that don't get said are the things that linger the longest. Returning felt like stepping back into a dream I could never quite wake up from. I had a small apartment above a pub just off Main Street. Nothing fancy. I kept my head down and worked quietly, cataloging the town's history. But no matter how far I tried to distance myself from the Carters' old stories, they followed. When that year, I made the mistake of starting a project that would change everything, the oral histories of Blackwater. I thought I could handle it. I thought it was just stories, old wives' tales, and ramblings from drunken fishermen, nothing that would ever reach into the realm of the things my grandmother warned me about. But in Blackwater, stories had a way of reaching back. It started with Captain Harlow, the old fisherman who lived on the edge of town. He had lived through more storms than I could count, and had seen things at sea that no man should see. He told me he'd been visited by ghosts before, a kind of fog that seemed to roll in from the sea, bringing with it voices that weren't his own. "You'll hear it," he said one afternoon, his voice gravelly from years of shouting against the wind. "The voices in the mist. They're not from the living, you know, but they won't leave you alone. They've been around long enough to forget who they were in life." I sat with him by the pier that afternoon, recording his voice as he spoke. The wind howled, and the sea stretched out beyond us, an endless expanse that seemed to pulse with some deep, secret rhythm. I was entranced by his words, but when I listened to the tape later, I found something odd. There was a second voice, so faint at first I thought I had imagined it. But there it was. A whisper. A faint, sing-song lullaby, almost too soft to hear, layered beneath Captain Harlow's gravelly tones. I dismissed it at first. Static interference, I thought. A recording error. But then I played the tape again, and again. The lullaby was always there, always hidden underneath the fisherman's voice, a presence I couldn't shake. I asked Captain Harlow about it the next time I saw him, but he grew quiet when I brought it up. "That wasn't me," he said, his eyes narrow. "You shouldn't be listening to it." I couldn't let it go, though. As an archivist, I was driven by the need to understand, to preserve history, no matter how unsettling. But I wasn't prepared for what came next. I went to see Hester Lane, the town's last midwife, the woman who had delivered most of Blackwater's children. She was an old woman by then, frail but sharp-eyed, with hands that had known the weight of life and death. I had heard rumors about her past, about the 17 stillborn babies she'd delivered, each one marked with the same perfect handprint on their left shoulder. It was something I had to know more about. I remember sitting in her dimly lit living room, the smell of lavender and old wood filling the air. Her house was filled with photos, old wedding pictures, and birth certificates framed on the walls. It felt like a sanctuary of sorts, a quiet place where history was preserved in every corner. She spoke in a calm, steady voice, recounting stories of the past. But when I pressed her about the stillborn children, her face hardened. She refused to speak, her lips pressing tightly together. "You shouldn't ask about things like that," she said, her voice low. "Some things should stay buried." But I pushed her further, asking why the babies all had the same mark. Why? It couldn't just be coincidence. She finally relented, her eyes distant as she spoke. "They didn't die naturally, Elijah," she said, her voice quivering. "Those babies, they were taken." Taken? I wasn't sure what she meant, but the room seemed to grow colder, the air thicker. It was later that night, as I listened to the recording of our conversation, that I heard it. The lullaby, faint at first, then louder, clearer, almost as if it were breathing through the speakers. It was the same lullaby I had heard on the captain's tape. I froze. I stopped the recording, my heart pounding. But the lullaby didn't stop. It played on, even after I turned the machine off, until the sound faded into the room, filling the space around me. That's when I knew something was wrong. That lullaby, the voice that wasn't mine, wasn't coming from the tapes. It was inside my head. For days I tried to ignore it, but the presence of the lullaby was always there. I could hear it when I walked down the street. I could hear it when I lay in bed at night. It became a constant hum in the background, a soft, insistent sound that gnawed at my nerves. And then, one evening, I made a mistake. I listened to it. Played the tapes of Captain Harlow, of Hester Lane, over and over until I couldn't stop. Each time I played them, the lullaby grew louder, clearer. It wasn't just in my head anymore. It was everywhere. The walls, the windows, the air itself seemed to hum with the melody. That was the night I heard the whisper just behind me. Tell it again. I turned, my heart hammering in my chest, but there was no one there. No one but the empty walls of my apartment, the sound of the wind rattling the windows. The Hollow Man wasn't just a story. He was here. And somehow, in my obsession with capturing these histories, I had awoken something, and it wanted me to keep telling. April 7th, 2010. It had been a few weeks since I first heard the whisper, since I first realized that the lullaby was more than just a disturbing audio glitch or an overactive imagination. It had been there, an ever-present hum in the background of my life. At night, it would slip into my thoughts just as I was about to fall asleep. During the day, it would worm its way into my mind like a quiet intrusion, a reminder that something unseen was watching, waiting. I hadn't told anyone about it, not Hester, not Captain Harlow. No one in Blackwater seemed willing to acknowledge the things they had seen, heard, or felt. They kept to themselves, each family with its own silences. But my silence was different now. The more I played the tapes, the more I realized I was sinking deeper into something I didn't fully understand. Something old. Something that had been buried long before I ever picked up the first recorder. The townspeople had started to notice my change. It was subtle at first, a slight shift in the way I spoke, an edge to my voice that hadn't been there before. I wasn't sure if it was the hours I spent in the archives or the constant pressure of the lullaby echoing in my mind, but I had started to see the world differently. People's words didn't sound right. Their voices became warped, the way old recordings would distort after too many playbacks. I tried to ignore it. I had to finish what I started. I couldn't turn back, but it was getting harder to concentrate. The tapes began to warp in strange ways, as if the stories themselves were changing, morphing into something darker, more sinister. I'd hear things, whispers. In the background, voices in the static, words I couldn't place. I started to see shadows that weren't there, fleeting shapes in my peripheral vision. The lullaby was no longer just a sound, it was a presence. One evening I sat in my grandmother's house, the old house that had been abandoned for years. It was empty now, just as she had left it. The dust was thick on the furniture, the air stale, but I couldn't stay away from it. The house had always felt like a place where the past lingered, thick as smoke, and I needed to understand what was happening to me, what I had awoken. I sat in the parlor, surrounded by the boxes of old photographs, letters, and tapes that my family had accumulated over the years. My grandmother's warning echoed in my mind. Some stories aren't just told, they wake up when you say them. I had already told them, hadn't I? I had played those stories aloud, let them echo through the quiet of my apartment. And now, they were waking up. The moment I opened the first box, I knew I had made a mistake. The lid creaked as if the house itself was waking from a long slumber, and a strange chill ran down my spine. The first tape I picked up was one of my grandmother's oldest recordings. It was her voice, soft and clear, recounting a story of the Hollow Man, of how he came in the quiet hours of the night, when the stories stopped. I put the tape into the player. At first, it was just as I remembered. My grandmother's voice, strong and steady, telling the tale that had been passed down through generations. But as the story continued, I began to hear something else, something beneath her voice. The lullaby, louder, clearer than before. The hum grew in volume until it drowned out my grandmother's words. And then, in the static, a voice spoke. Low, guttural and unmistakably male. Tell it again, it rasped. I froze. My heart stopped in my chest, and for a moment I couldn't move. The voice wasn't just on the tape. It was here, in the room with me, crawling beneath the floorboards, creeping up the walls. I tried to stop the tape, but the player wouldn't budge. The voice continued, growing louder, growing closer. The hum of the lullaby swelled until it filled my ears, until it became the only sound in the room. My hands shook as I fumbled with the player, desperately trying to silence the noise. That's when I saw it. In the reflection of the window, I saw something standing behind me. It was tall, too tall, with limbs that seemed to stretch unnaturally, long. Its face was obscured, but I could feel its eyes on me, cold and unblinking. The shadow moved closer, its form warping in and out of focus, flickering like a flame in the wind. I turned to face it, but there was nothing there. Just the empty parlor, the dust motes floating in the light from the window. But I could still feel it just beyond my reach. The presence. The thing that had been waiting. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the tape player and threw it across the room. The sound stopped, but the echo of that voice, of that presence, lingered in my mind, filling every empty space. I sat there in the silence, my body trembling. The room was still, but the weight of what had just happened pressed down on me like a heavy stone. I couldn't deny it anymore. The hollow man was real. And now, he was awake. The next day I went to the town's church. It was an old, stone building, dark and cold inside, with the smell of mildew in the air. I had to talk to someone. I couldn't carry this alone anymore. Father O'Reilly had always been kind to me as a child, and though I had lost my faith over the years, I needed answers. I found him in the back, tending to the old records. His hands were trembling as he worked, a nervous habit I'd never seen before. When he looked up, his face went pale. "Elijah," he said softly, "you shouldn't be doing this." I sat down, my heart pounding. "What do you mean?" "You've awakened it," he said, his voice strained. "The hollow man. He's here. And there's no stopping him once you've spoken his name aloud." I wanted to scream at him, to ask why no one had warned me sooner, but I already knew the answer. They couldn't stop it either. Not the way my grandmother had tried to. Not the way the town had tried to bury the stories that had come before. The only way to stop it, Father O'Reilly continued, his eyes filled with a deep, unspoken sorrow, is to silence the stories. But I couldn't. I had already told too many. And the worst part was I knew he was right. I couldn't stop telling the stories, even if I wanted to. The hollow man was inside me now, in my blood, in my voice. He didn't just take stories. He became them. And now he was a part of mine. I stood up, my mind racing. I had to leave. I had to get away from Blackwater, from all of it, but I knew, deep down, that running was futile. The stories that keep us alive are the ones that never die, and the hollow man would keep coming for me no matter how far I went. Because once a story is told, it wakes up, and it can never be put back to sleep. May 15th, 2010. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. At night, the shadows in my apartment seemed to grow longer, their edges curling in ways that didn't make sense. The hum of the lullaby was always there now, like a faint vibration in the air, just below my hearing. It wasn't just in my mind anymore. It was everywhere. The walls of my apartment seemed to whisper back at me, and every time I closed my eyes I could hear it louder, clearer. I had to leave. I knew that, deep down. But where could I go? I had no family left in Blackwater. My grandmother was gone, and my parents, well, they'd never been the type to stick around for long. They'd left when I was young, and now they lived somewhere far off in some distant place where I couldn't reach them. I had nowhere to run, no one to turn to. Blackwater was the only place I had left. So I stayed. The last time I went to the town's church, I didn't get much out of Father O'Reilly. He was the same, too calm, too cryptic. He told me that silence was the only way to stop the hollow man, but I knew it wasn't that simple. The stories had been passed down for generations. My grandmother had told me that. Some stories weren't just stories, they had power. And now, with every word I spoke, with every tale I listened to, I had added fuel to the fire. The next night, As the wind howled outside, I found myself at my grandmother's house again. The house that had once smelled like cinnamon and wood smoke was now thick with dust and the smell of mildew. The walls groaned under the weight of their secrets. I sat in the old parlor, surrounded by the piles of tapes, photographs, and notebooks that had been my grandmother's obsession. I couldn't stop myself. I had to finish this. I had to know what was at the end of the story. I grabbed the last tape. It was an old one of the very first recordings my grandmother had made. It was cracked and faded, but there was something about it that made me pause. I hesitated, but only for a moment. I had to know. I placed the tape into the recorder, pressing play. Her voice filled the room, smooth and clear, as though she was sitting next to me. She spoke about the town, about the Hollow Man, about the curse that had followed the Carters for generations. It was the same story I had heard so many times before. The Hollow Man, a figure with no face, no identity, who would come when the story stopped. But as the tape played, something changed. Her voice became distorted, warped by static. And then in the background I heard it. The lullaby. Louder now, a soft hum that felt almost like it was coming from behind the walls. I tried to turn off the recorder, but my hand wouldn't move. I was frozen. The hum grew louder, the static crackling. And then I heard a voice. It wasn't my grandmother's. It wasn't even human. It was a whisper, soft and insistent, like something ancient. You can't stop it. My heart thudded in my chest, my breath coming in short gasps. I tried again to stop the tape, but it was stuck, playing on repeat. The voice spoke again, this time clearer, colder. You woke him. The air in the room shifted, grew colder. I felt a presence, like something had materialized right behind me. My skin prickled. Every hair on the back of my neck stood up. The voice continued, its tone now a hiss. The stories are his. You belong to him now. I reached for the tape player, my fingers trembling. It was useless. The tape wouldn't stop. The voice wasn't just coming from the recorder anymore. It was in the room with me, its breath hot on my ear. And then it spoke one final time. Tell it again. The words hit me like a physical blow. My chest constricted, I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. I was paralyzed, trapped in the moment. The voice became a low growl, an inhuman sound that seemed to reverberate through the room. The walls groaned, the floor creaked beneath me, and the room seemed to grow darker, the shadows stretching until they consumed everything. And then, silence. The tape stopped. The hum faded. The air in the room returned to normal. But it was too late. I knew that now. I had crossed a line. The stories I had told, the ones I had recorded, had summoned something that couldn't be stopped. The Hollow Man wasn't just a legend. He wasn't just a story passed down from generation to generation. He was real, and now he was with me. I sat there in the dark, the weight of it all settling on my shoulders. I had awakened something ancient, something hungry, and now it was too late to undo the damage. I didn't know what the Hollow Man wanted, but I had a sinking feeling that it had nothing to do with stories anymore. It wanted me. The tape was still in the recorder, but I couldn't bring myself to touch it. I couldn't bring myself to listen to it again, not after what it had done to me. The town of Blackwater was quiet now, and the moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the streets. I could feel the presence of the Hollow Man lurking just beyond my vision, waiting for the next story to be told. I had become part of his tale, and now there was no way out. May 22nd, 2010. The house felt different now. The air was thick, like it was waiting for something, waiting for me to say it. The darkness in the corners of the room seemed to stretch longer, the shadows seeping into the very walls. The house that once felt like home now felt like a tomb. I couldn't sleep. Not because I was afraid of the Hollow Man, that thing lurking behind the stories, but because of the way everything felt off. It was as if the entire town was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I wasn't sure if it was the fear of what I had done or the fear of what I was about to do, but I knew that this was it. The end of the story, I sat by the window, watching the fog roll in from the sea. Blackwater always felt like this, shrouded in mist, hidden away from the world, like it was stuck in time. I hadn't spoken to anyone in days. People avoided me now. They would look the other way when they saw me, and if I spoke to them, they would shuffle their feet and give me nervous, quick glances. Even the dogs wouldn't bark at me anymore. The silence in this town had taken on a weight of its own, pressing down on me. And then, at the edge of my vision, I saw it. A figure standing just outside the house. It wasn't a person. It couldn't have been. There was no one in Blackwater who looked like that. The figure was tall, unnaturally so, with limbs that seemed too long, too angular. Its face was obscured in the fog, but I knew what it was. I had seen that face in my grandmother's stories, in the tapes, in my nightmares. The Hollow Man. I could feel his presence now, as if he were inside me. His breath was hot against my skin, and I knew that the stories I had told had led me to this moment. The thing my grandmother had warned me about, the thing that wasn't just a figure of folklore but a force, was here, and I had no way to escape. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking. The fog outside thickened, crawling up to the windows, pressing against the glass like it was alive. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't wait for him to come inside, to take whatever he wanted from me. But I also knew that there was no way out. Not anymore. I walked to the attic, the floorboards creaking under my weight. The old tapes were stacked neatly on the table, their labels faded with age. I knew the stories by heart, now. They had been etched into my mind, each one a part of the curse that had followed my family for generations. I picked up the recorder. My hands were steady, but inside my heart was hammering. I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to feed the darkness anymore. But the stories had a hold on me, and I knew what I had to do. I pressed the play button. My grandmother's voice filled the room, clear as day. She spoke of the Hollow Man, of the curse, of the things that waited in the dark corners of the world. And as I listened, I realized that her voice was no longer just a memory. It was a part of him now, a part of the Hollow Man's power. The lullaby began to hum softly in the background, its notes distorted and wrong. I could feel my skin prickle, my throat closing up. The static crackled, the sound warping until I could barely make out the words, but I knew what they were. "Tell the story again," the voice whispered. I felt something shift in the room. The shadows seemed to draw closer, pressing in on me. The walls of the attic groaned as if the house itself was alive, like it was reacting to the story I had told. The voice grew louder, the hum of the lullaby filling the room, drowning out everything else. And then, there was another voice. A soft guttural whisper underneath my grandmother's words. "You belong to him now." The tape was spinning wildly in the recorder. It wasn't supposed to do that. The tape was being pulled in faster and faster, as if something was tugging at it from the other side. My breath caught in my throat as the lights in the house flickered and died. The room plunged into darkness. And then, I heard it. A loud, hollow sound, like a door opening. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see what was behind me. What had entered the room? The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of something terrible, something ancient. But the story wasn't over. I could feel the Hollow Man now, right behind me, his presence pressing against me, suffocating me. I could hear his breath, ragged and slow, and then his voice. "You woke me." I didn't scream. I couldn't. I was frozen, caught in the moment, the weight of his words pressing down on me. The stories had awakened something that should never have been brought into the light, and now it was too late to undo the damage. I reached for the recorder one last time. I had to finish the story. I had to tell it, even if it meant sealing my fate. With trembling hands, I pressed the record button, and I told the story again. When I first signed the lease for the bungalow at 7 Blackthorn Lane, I didn't think much of the landlord's peculiar smile. Mr. Voss seemed harmless enough. An older man, maybe in his late 60s, with too much thin hair plastered to his scalp and a jacket that was a little too tight. I found the price of the place strange, absurdly low for a house in the middle of nowhere. The fact that it was furnished made it even stranger, but I didn't care. I was new to Ravenswood, and I needed somewhere to live. Mr. Voss had warned me, though. He said it like a joke, but the glint in his eyes told me it wasn't one. "No one stays long here," he'd said, holding the door open for me as I took the key. I shrugged it off. After all, the mill town of Ravenswood had been in decline for years, ever since the Blackthorn textile mill shut down, and most of the workers either moved away or died in that boiler explosion back in the 1920s. I had no reason to suspect that the house itself held anything more than memories of a forgotten past. That night, my first night, was colder than I expected for late October. I settled in quickly, unpacked my few belongings, checked the water and lights, and set my alarm clock. The place had a strange character to it, though. The walls creaked, and the floorboards groaned under my feet like the house was trying to speak. But the strangest thing about it was the attic door. It was an old door, a thick wooden panel at the top of a steep staircase leading to the attic. The nails holding it in place looked too new, like someone had installed it just a few years ago. I didn't give it much thought. There was a house to settle into and work to think about. The only thing I noticed that night, aside from the house settling in the wind, was a subtle draft, one that seemed to come from the attic itself. At 12:07 a.m., I was lying in bed, trying to sleep when I first heard it. The sound was muffled, coming from directly above my head. I thought it was the house creaking, the wind pressing against the roof. Then the footsteps started. Heavy, firm, boots on wood. Not the light patter of a small animal or the shuffling of old walls. This was deliberate, slow, methodical. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. "Raccoons," I muttered to myself, trying to rationalize it. "It's just raccoons in the attic." But the sound continued, step after step. I listened closely, my heart hammering in my chest. Then, as if in response to my thoughts, there was a soft, hollow knock, 3 deliberate raps, followed by another. A second set of knocks, even softer this time, but no less deliberate. I wasn't sure if it was my mind playing tricks on me, but the air seemed to grow colder, heavier. My eyes flicked nervously to the attic door, and then I heard it. A voice that wasn't really a voice, not a whisper, not even a murmur, just clicking. Wet, like a tongue probing against rotten teeth, filling the space between the knocks. "Rent's due." The words, if they could even be called words, sent a cold shiver up my spine. I shot up in bed, my body tense, heart racing. I stared at the ceiling, watching the water stains ripple in the dim light from my bedside lamp. I didn't move, too afraid to even breathe. It wasn't the sound of an animal. It wasn't a creak from the house settling. And it wasn't a trick of the wind. Whatever it was, whoever it was up there in the attic, right above me. The minutes stretched on, each one heavier than the last. I lay frozen in place, staring at the ceiling, until the sounds finally stopped. The footsteps, the knocks, the strange, wet clicking. When it all faded into an eerie silence, I tried to dismiss it. The exhaustion from moving into the bungalow, the unfamiliarity of the house, and the isolation, it all must have gotten to me. My imagination, maybe. I told myself that it was nothing, just an old house. I told myself that over and over again. But I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The house creaked and groaned. But it was more than that. It was as if something or someone was still up there waiting. I knew the attic was empty, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Mr. Voss's cryptic warning. No one stays long here. And I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't talking about moving away. The morning after that first night, I didn't want to face what had happened. Part of me wanted to forget it. Chalk it up to the stress of moving into a new place, the weight of living alone, the isolation. After all, Ravenswood was a quiet, dying town. Nothing exciting ever happened here, right? I had an appointment with a client in town, so I forced myself to get out of bed and go about my day. The whole morning felt like a blur. I met with them at the local bank, signed a few papers, and tried to keep my mind off the attic. But the moment I walked back through the front door of the bungalow, my thoughts rushed back in, as if they'd been waiting for me. The attic door still loomed, above me like a silent sentinel. The house felt different during the day. The sun streamed in through the small windows and the air smelled faintly of dust and old wood. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The house had an oppressive weight to it, one that was only growing heavier. I spent the rest of the afternoon trying to ignore it. But around 4 in the afternoon, the curiosity got the better of me. I found myself standing in front of the attic door, staring at it like it might reveal the truth. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I wasn't sure why I felt compelled to open it. Maybe it was the strange sounds from last night. Maybe it was the nagging sense that something had happened in this house long before I ever arrived. The door was old. It had a heavy brass knob that turned with some resistance, but it opened with a groan. The staircase leading up to the attic was narrow and steep, the steps creaking under my weight. I hesitated at the base of the stairs, peering up into the shadows. There was nothing. No odd movement, no sounds, just silence. I climbed slowly, each step taking me closer to the unknown. The smell in the air was musty, like dampness had settled, in the wood. When I reached the top, I flicked on the light switch, but the bulb didn't work. Just my luck. I pulled out my phone and used its flashlight to illuminate the space. The attic was even worse than I had imagined. The floor was covered in a thin layer of dust and cobwebs stretched between the rafters, some hanging so thickly it felt like they were waiting to wrap around me. There was an old, half-rot wooden rocking horse sitting near the corner, its painted surface chipped and cracked with age. It was covered in a layer of mold, turning a sickly shade of green and black. The sight made my stomach churn. I didn't know what I expected to find up here, maybe old furniture or boxes of forgotten memories. But the sight of that rocking horse made my skin crawl. It was the kind of thing you'd see in a horror movie, abandoned and left to decay. As I moved deeper into the attic, I saw a few other items that didn't belong. 7 identical black suits hanging from an old rusted pipe on the far wall. The suits looked like they hadn't been worn in years. They were neatly pressed, each one a size 44 long, hanging with the precision of someone who cared too much. I reached for one, my fingers brushing the cold fabric, and then stopped myself. There was something unsettling about the way they were arranged, something off-putting in their symmetrical order. Then I spotted it, a small wooden ledger barely visible under a pile of old newspaper clippings. I picked it up, brushing off the dust and mold that clung to its surface. The pages were yellowed, the writing scrawled in a hurried, almost frantic hand. The first entry in the ledger was dated October 23rd, 1923. My eyes narrowed as I read through the names, many of them unfamiliar to me, but there was one name that caught my attention: Edward Carter. I felt a strange chill creep up my spine as I read it. It was the same surname as mine, though I had no relatives in Ravenswood, at least none that I knew of. I flipped through the ledger pages, and as I did, I found something even more disturbing. A list of dates, and beside each name, the number of days the person had stayed in the house. The final entry was dated October 25th, 1923, the day the Blackthorn textile mill exploded. The name next to it was the same as the last: Edward Carter. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know how or why, but the name seemed to be tied to this house and to my family. It was too coincidental to ignore. Suddenly, a sharp sound broke through my thoughts. The distinct creak of a door opening. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat, but the attic door was still closed. No one had come up the stairs. But the rocking horse? It was moving. It wasn't much at first, just a faint rocking back and forth, but it quickly gained momentum. The sound of its creaking echoed through the space like an ominous lullaby. I backed away slowly, my mind racing, my heart thundering in my chest. That's when I noticed something else. On the far side of the attic, near the wall, something was creeping out of the shadows. A shape, dark and formless. The air grew cold again and the temperature dropped so rapidly I could see my breath in the flashlight beam. I wanted to run. I wanted to get out of there. But I was frozen, unable to move, too terrified to even speak. The shape stopped in front of the rocking horse, its outline shifting like smoke. The wet clicking sound from last night started again. Slow, deliberate. It wasn't until I heard the words that I knew I had to leave. Rent's due. The attic. Door slammed shut behind me. I didn't sleep, not a single minute. When I finally dragged myself out of bed, the sun hadn't fully risen. The light outside was dim, the sky a murky gray, and the air felt thick with something unspeakable. Even though I'd told myself not to go back up to the attic, I found, my feet moving toward the stairs anyway. I stood at the base of the staircase for a moment, staring at the door at the top. It was still closed, but something in the air felt heavier. I couldn't explain it, just a growing sense of dread, a pulling weight at the back of my mind. The darkness of the attic loomed above me, like a great mouth waiting to swallow me, whole. But I didn't go up. I'd made my decision. I was leaving. The thought of staying in that house, especially after what I'd witnessed, was suffocating. I'd convinced myself that this place had been wrong from the start, that it was never meant to be a home for anyone. The presence, the oddity of everything. No one should have to endure that. I couldn't. But even as I packed my things, I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. The house creaked and groaned around me like it was alive, protesting the decision to leave. I could almost hear it whispering. It felt like the walls themselves were pulling away from me, trying to make me stay. I had just started gathering my clothes when I heard the knock on the door. It was too early for Mr. Voss, the landlord. He never came by before noon. And besides, he'd made it clear when I signed the lease that his presence was something to be avoided, unless absolutely necessary. My heart rate spiked as I stood frozen in place. That knock, it didn't feel right. It wasn't the casual tap of a visitor. It was deliberate, slow, each knock echoing in the hollow silence of the bungalow. Knock. 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 I swallowed, feeling my throat tighten. I took a few steps toward the door, but my hand hesitated on the knob. Something inside me told me not to open it, but curiosity overpowered my fear. I cracked the door open just a sliver, enough to peer through the narrow gap. There, standing in front of the doorway, was Mr. Voss. His smile was as wide as I'd ever seen it, his yellowed teeth gleaming in the faint light of the early morning. He was dressed in his usual dark slacks and old frayed sweater, but there was something different about him today. His eyes were too bright, too hungry. "Mr. Reeves," he said, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. "I trust you're settling in well." I couldn't help but notice the odd pause before he spoke my name. There was a familiarity in the way he said it, an intimacy I didn't want to acknowledge. "I'm getting by," I managed to reply, keeping my voice steady, even though my chest was tightening. Mr. Voss's smile didn't waver. "I see. I hope you're not finding the house difficult to adjust to. It does have its quirks, but it's quite a charming place, don't you think?" I didn't respond right away. The tension in my stomach was unbearable, my instincts screaming at me to shut the door and never look back. But before I could say anything, Mr. Voss leaned in slightly, his smile narrowing to something more unsettling. "You know, it's funny," he continued. "The last tenant, well, they stayed here for quite some time. Much longer than anyone usually does." The hairs on my neck stood on end. The last tenant had left without a trace, and Mr. Voss's phrasing seemed too deliberate. I swallowed hard. "Just a little unexpected," he added, almost too casually. "But you don't need to worry about them. People come and go here, like the wind. It's just how things work at Blackthorn." Lane, I felt my breath catch in my throat. There it was again. That feeling of being manipulated like I was a puppet and Mr. Voss was pulling the strings. I've decided to leave, I said abruptly, more forcefully than I meant to. The words felt like a weight lifting from my chest. I'll be out by the end of the day. Mr. Voss's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. Barely noticeable, but enough to make my pulse race. Then, just as quickly, it returned, though it was colder, more calculating. I see, he said slowly, his voice soft and syrupy. Well, I wouldn't want to force you to stay where you're not comfortable, of course, but you might want to reconsider. His words hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. I've made up my mind, I replied, trying to keep the edge of panic from creeping into my voice. Mr. Voss's eyes flicked toward the attic, and for a brief, heart-stopping moment, I thought I saw something shift in the space behind him, just at the corner of my vision. He didn't wait for me to say anything more. His smile broadened to an almost eerie degree, and he nodded, as if he'd known all along what I would say. Well, Mr. Reeves, he said, backing away from the door, I hope you don't regret your decision. Some things, once you see them, you can't unsee them. His words felt like a warning, a chilling promise. Then he turned and walked away, his shoes clicking against the old porch. I stood there for a long moment, my breath shallow. The door was still cracked open, but I didn't want to close it. I didn't want to shut myself in again, but eventually I did. As I began packing up the rest of my things, grabbing my clothes, throwing things into boxes, I couldn't help but glance toward the attic stairs. The house was silent now. No creaks, no rattles, but the feeling of something watching me was palpable. The weight of it pressed down on me, squeezing the air from my lungs. I had no intention of staying another night in that house. Even though I hadn't officially found all the answers, I didn't need to. I knew enough to walk away, but before I could finish packing, I felt it. The soft thud of something heavy dropping upstairs. I stood frozen, unsure of whether I had imagined it. But then, click, 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 the unmistakable sound of boots on wood, slowly, methodically. The attic door creaked open, and just as I turned to leave, I saw it, a shadow slipping down the stairs, its presence smothering the space with a chill so deep it made the air burn. Rent's due, the whisper came, hoarse and thin, from the dark. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. With one last glance at the window, 7 attic windows now, filled with watching eyes, I grabbed my keys and bolted. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. I knew the house would follow me. The car door slammed behind me with a finality I couldn't ignore. I stared at the steering wheel for a long moment, my fingers gripping it like it was the only thing tethering me to this world. The engine was running, but my body felt numb, like I was still in the house. I could feel the weight of it all pressing in, like the walls were closing in on me even here in the car. I looked up at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone, or something, standing in the rear window, watching me leave. But there was nothing. The empty road stretched out ahead of me, gray and desolate. The fog had thickened since I'd packed up my things. It hung in the air like a heavy blanket, the kind you could almost feel on your skin. I took a deep breath and forced myself to drive. I had no destination. I didn't care. All that mattered was getting as far away from 7 Blackthorn Lane as possible. But as I pulled onto the main road, something made me glance at the side mirror. There it was, the house, still standing, still waiting. I swerved, my heart pounding in my chest, and looked straight ahead again. I couldn't let myself think about it. I couldn't let myself believe that there was anything following me. There was nothing, just my mind playing tricks. That's all it was, just the stress, just the fear. I kept telling myself that hours later I found myself in a small diner on the outskirts of Ravenswood. I hadn't intended to stop, but something in me had needed the pause. I needed to breathe. I needed to forget about what had happened in that house, to pretend for just a few minutes that none of it had ever happened. The diner was nearly empty, save for a woman sitting alone at the counter, sipping coffee, and the waitress who was absorbed in some crossword puzzle. The place smelled faintly of burnt toast and cheap coffee, and the warm yellow lighting seemed like the last normal thing in the world. I slid into a booth, trying to shake the unease that still clung to me like a second skin. My fingers trembled slightly as I picked up the laminated menu, even though I had no intention of ordering anything. I just needed a minute to gather myself. "Can I get you something to drink?" the waitress asked, glancing up from her crossword. "Just water," I said, my voice hoarse. "And can I ask you something?" She raised an eyebrow, setting her pen down and leaning forward slightly. "Sure," she said, her tone neutral, but there was something in her eyes, a subtle shift that told me she wasn't as detached as she seemed. "Do you know about Blackthorn Lane? The old mill houses?" The waitress's eyes flickered, but she didn't answer right away. She just looked at me, a faint unease crossing her features. "That place," she began slowly, almost as if she was weighing each word. "You live there?" I nodded, feeling the weight of her gaze. I wasn't sure if I wanted to explain myself further, but the words seemed to spill out anyway. I did, just moved out. She leaned back, her eyes narrowing just slightly. "You're not the first person to move out of there." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then glanced at the woman at the counter, as if checking if she was listening. When she saw the woman was still absorbed in her coffee, she leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "People don't stay long in those houses. I'm sure you've heard the stories. They're not just stories. People move in and they leave. Sometimes they just leave. Sometimes they don't." I blinked, not fully understanding. "What do you mean they don't leave?" The waitress's lips pressed into a thin line, and her gaze shifted, as if she didn't want to reveal too much. "You might not want to know, kid, but there's a reason those houses are so cheap. People die in them, or worse, people disappear, just like the mill workers back in the day. There's something wrong with that place. Always has been." I leaned forward, my heart racing. "I don't understand. What's wrong with it? What happened?" The waitress sighed, almost like she was trying to find the words. "The mill explosion. That's the obvious thing. But it goes deeper than that. Some of those workers didn't just die in the explosion. Some of them stayed behind. And the house? The one you're in now? It was built for them. It was built to house the dead. Or maybe the ones who came after them. Either way, no one ever stays long." I felt the blood drain from my face. I couldn't breathe. "What do you mean, the dead?" She reached out and touched my hand, her fingers cool against my skin. "Listen to me, kid. You're lucky you made it out. If you want to stay alive, you get as far away from that house as you can. The ones who stayed, they don't come back. But the house? The house doesn't forget. You just might be the next one to disappear." I pulled my hand away from hers, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. I don't believe you. It's just a house, just a stupid building." She shook her head slowly. "Maybe. But it's not just the house. It's what's inside. And whatever it is, it's not done with you yet." I paid for my water without saying another word. As I walked out of the diner, the wind hit me like a slap in the face. I hadn't realized how cold it had gotten. My car was still parked on the side of the road, and I was about to get in when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. The woman who had been sitting at the counter was standing in the window of the diner now, staring out at me. Her face was expressionless, but I could see her lips moving just barely, as if she was whispering something. I didn't stick around to find out what. I got in the car and drove. But even as I put miles between myself and Blackthorn Lane, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, that something was waiting. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but deep down I knew it was more than that. The house had already taken something from me, and I wasn't sure it was going to let go. I thought I could outrun, and I thought leaving Ravenswood would bring me peace, but the fog didn't dissipate. It just followed me. The weight that had settled in my chest after I moved out of that house had only grown heavier. The further I drove, the more I felt like I was still there. Like that house, those walls, those shadows were still watching me, closing in. But it wasn't just the house anymore. It was something inside me. A feeling that I wasn't fully awake. I could still hear the scratching on the walls, feel the air growing colder when I turned my back. The house might have been miles behind me, but it had never let go. I hadn't slept in over a day. I don't know if I was afraid of what I might see in my dreams, or if I was afraid I might never wake up from them again. Every time I closed my eyes, the vision of the attic door opening crept into my mind. I could hear the clicking, the voice that wasn't a voice. I turned the key in the ignition, my hands trembling. The gas station I'd stopped at earlier was the last bit of civilization I'd seen for hours. I wasn't sure where I was going anymore. I just had to drive, had to leave, But where? I grabbed my phone from the passenger seat, but it felt pointless to call anyone. My family wouldn't believe me. I could hear the laughter in my head. The same laugh I'd heard the night I left the house. I pulled over at a dilapidated rest stop, tired and drained. The truckers were asleep in their cabs, the small fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. A sign by the men's restroom read "No loitering" in faded red paint. There was no one around. The air smelled like wet pavement and stale cigarettes. It felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. That's when it hit me. My eyes stung and I wiped them quickly. I thought it was exhaustion at first, but I knew better. Something had followed me from Blackthorn Lane. It wasn't a house. It wasn't just some sick joke, it was something deeper than that. Something that had wrapped itself around my soul and was pulling me back. I sat in the car, staring at my phone. My thumb hovered over the call button. I almost dialed Voss. I almost called him, demanding to know more, to tell me the truth. But I knew it wouldn't help. He wasn't going to explain anything to me. He was part of it. I had felt that the moment I first met him, the way he spoke, the way he smiled too much, like he was waiting for something. Maybe he was waiting for me to figure it out. Maybe it was all a game to him, but I wasn't sure if I could keep playing anymore. The silence in the car was deafening. My reflection stared back at me from the rearview mirror, pale, with deep bags under my eyes. I looked like I hadn't slept in days, which wasn't far from the truth. I didn't even recognize myself anymore. There was a soft tap on the window. My heart nearly stopped. I spun around in my seat. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it. But there it was again. Another tap. But this time, more deliberate. I reached for the door handle, then stopped. My hand trembled as I hesitated, unsure of what to expect. Slowly, I cracked the window just enough to see who it was. A man stood there, too close, his face too pale in the dim light. His expression was familiar, and I didn't want to recognize him. It was Mr. Voss. "Leaving so soon?" he said, his smile as wide as ever, his teeth almost too white, almost too sharp. I flinched, pulling the window up halfway, but not fast enough. "The house will call you back," he said. "It always does." I slammed the window shut and locked the door, my breath coming in short gasps. My head spun. I didn't know if I was hallucinating, but then I felt it, like something was pressing against the back of my seat, something heavy and cold, something watching. I didn't even need to look in the rearview mirror. I felt it. I slammed the car into drive and sped out of the rest stop, tires squealing on the wet road. The rain had started again, heavy, coming down in sheets, blurring the world outside the car. I didn't look back. I drove for hours, maybe longer, but I never stopped. Not for gas, not for food, not for anything. I couldn't. My mind was clouded with memories of the house, of the attic door opening on its own, of the shadow pouring down the ladder like oil, the rocking horse moving, the clicking voice. I kept telling myself it was just fear, just my mind working against me, that it wasn't real, that it couldn't be. But as the night dragged on, I began to realize something. The house hadn't let go of me. The shadow was still with me. The door was still opening. and I couldn't run from it anymore. By dawn, I was on a desolate road that twisted through a forest, the fog thicker than before, clinging to the trees like ghosts. My eyes burned. My head ached. I couldn't drive anymore. My body was telling me to stop, to sleep, to rest. I pulled off the road, parked the car on the shoulder, and sat in silence. There was no sound except the soft hum of the engine and the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. For a moment, everything felt normal, like I was okay. And then, the voice came. It wasn't a voice, really. More like a click, a sound in the back of my mind. Rent's due. It was the same clicking sound I had heard in the attic, the one that made my blood run cold. My heart skipped a beat, then raced. I looked into the rearview mirror. There was nothing there. The back seat was empty. But I knew. I wasn't alone. I wasn't escaping. The house was still calling. And this time there was nowhere to run. I woke to the sound of knocking. It was slow, methodical, almost deliberate. The tap, tap, tap echoed through the walls, each knock a steady rhythm that seemed to seep into my very bones. I lay still for a moment, trying to convince myself that it was just the house settling. Some old creaking in the bones of the building, something explainable. But this wasn't just the house. The knocking continued, wrapping itself around the room in a perfect clockwise motion, as though someone, something, was walking within the walls, keeping pace with my thoughts. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, the dim glow from the screen lighting up the room as I unlocked it. I started recording, the static buzzing faintly in my ears. For 17 minutes, the screen displayed nothing but grainy white noise. But just as I thought I might finally drift back to sleep, the static cleared and the words came through. A single phrase, low and distorted, but unmistakable. You brought it with you. I felt my heart freeze in my chest. The voice was cold, metallic, like it didn't belong in this world, like it had been pulled from somewhere far darker than this decrepit building. The walls seemed to hum in response, vibrating with the pressure of the words. I sat up in bed, staring into the darkness, the unease crawling up my spine. I was sure my mind was playing tricks on me, but then I realized those words had no reason to exist. They weren't something I could have imagined. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Every slight noise, every creak of the floorboards beneath me, made my heart race faster. The air in the room felt heavier, thicker, as though the space itself was trying to suffocate me. And when morning finally came, when the first thin rays of light bled through the broken blinds, I thought the nightmare was over. But it wasn't. I stumbled out of bed, my legs weak, my stomach tight with anxiety. I was desperate for normalcy, desperate for something to reassure me that whatever was happening in this apartment wasn't real. I went to the kitchen, rubbed my eyes, and tried to shake the feeling that I was still being watched even though no one was around. But when I looked down at the counter, I froze. My kitchen knives were arranged in a sunburst pattern. It was as though someone had spent hours, carefully placing them in perfect symmetry, all pointing outward. I couldn't remember ever putting them down like that. I was certain I hadn't. The blades glinted in the harsh morning light, the pattern both mesmerizing and terrifying. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. I couldn't stay in the kitchen long. I turned, my mind racing, heart pounding, and headed for the bathroom. Maybe I was just sleep deprived. Maybe I was just imagining things. I splashed water on my face, hoping to wash away whatever this was. But when I looked up at the bathroom mirror, my stomach dropped. There, etched into the surface, were fingernail marks, deep, jagged scratches, like someone had tried to claw their way through the glass. The sight of them made me dizzy, my mind scrambling for an explanation. It was like someone had been there with me, watching me while I was in the bathroom. I stumbled backward, gasping for air. I turned to leave, but froze again when something caught my eye on the bed. On the pillow, there was something small, round and black, a single black suit button. It sat there, perfectly placed, like it had been waiting for me to find it. My heart pounded in my chest. I reached down and picked it up, feeling its smooth surface between my fingers. It didn't belong to me. I didn't even own a suit, let alone one that would have a button like this. I ran to the front door, my mind now spiraling out of control. I yanked it open, desperate to get away from whatever this place was turning into. But when I stepped into the hallway, there was no escape. The same thick, oppressive feeling clung to me like a fog, wrapping itself around my body and mind. The knocking had stopped, but something else had begun. A voice, low, insistent, and distant, began to hum at the edges of my consciousness. A soft, wet sound like fingers trailing along the walls. And with that sound I heard something else, something far worse. The unmistakable words, "You brought it with you." The walls between us had shifted, and I was no longer sure where I ended and the house began. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every step I took in the Holloway apartments, every creak of the floor beneath my feet seemed amplified in the silence that surrounded me. The building itself felt alive, groaning with age and history. The walls hummed with something I couldn't understand, something deep and pulsing, like the heartbeat of the place itself. And the knocking, that rhythmic, deliberate tapping, it had started again. I spent most of the evening pacing around the apartment, trying to convince myself it was all in my head, a product of stress, maybe too much caffeine, or a leftover sense of paranoia from Blackthorn Lane. But there was no escaping the fact that something was happening. That something was in the walls with me. I had to do something. I wasn't just going to sit here and wait for whatever it was to reveal itself, so I did what anyone with a shred of rationality would do in this situation. I installed cameras. It wasn't a big setup, just a few cheap motion sensors and a couple of basic webcams. I set them up at key points around the apartment, one by the kitchen, one near the bathroom, and another facing the bedroom door. I told myself it was a precaution, that I'd just gather a little footage to help figure out what was going on. But deep down, I knew this wasn't normal. I knew something was waiting for me, something I couldn't yet see. The night went by, slowly. I could feel the cameras watching me almost as much as I was watching them. Every time I passed one, I couldn't help but glance at the little green light indicating that they were recording. The feeling of being observed grew stronger, and with it came the sharp, metallic taste of fear in the back of my throat. The whole place felt wrong, too quiet, too empty. At 3:33 a.m., I was sitting in the kitchen staring at the live feed from the cameras. Everything was still. The apartment looked normal, at least from a distance, but the longer I stared, the more details began to pop out at me. The way the shadows shifted unnaturally in the corners of the room, the way the air seemed to distort in places, like heat waves rising from the floorboards. I tried to rationalize it, dirt on the camera lens, the low lighting, but I knew deep down that I wasn't imagining things. The first strange thing appeared. At 3:44 a.m., it was a shadow, just a fleeting movement at the corner of the kitchen camera. I leaned closer to the screen, my breath caught in my chest. The shadow moved unnaturally, too smooth, too fluid, like it wasn't bound by the same laws as everything else in the room. It darted across the kitchen and disappeared behind the refrigerator. But when I rewound the footage, the shadow didn't come back out. It just stopped. My hands were shaking now. I clicked over to the bedroom camera, hoping for some sign of normalcy. But there was nothing normal about what I saw. At 4:17 a.m., my own form was sitting up in bed. I wasn't awake. I knew I wasn't awake, but there I was, sitting up, staring straight ahead, completely still. My body was moving without me. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched myself, as though I were an outsider, detached from my own skin. The figure in the bed was me, and yet it wasn't. It was like a marionette, a puppet controlled by invisible strings. I clicked on the audio feed, hoping to hear something, anything that might explain what I was seeing. And then came the humming. It wasn't clear at first, but as I played the footage back, the sound became unmistakable. A low, wet hum, a sound that seemed to originate from the very walls themselves. It was a sound I hadn't heard before, not in the apartment, not in the building. It was wrong, and it was getting closer. I snapped the laptop shut, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. There was something in this apartment, something that wasn't just moving in the shadows but was also inside me, pulling my strings. I couldn't let it go on like this. I needed to know what was happening. I had to confront this head on, but as I stood up to leave the room, something else happened. At 4:44 a.m., the camera feed froze. The screen blinked out for a second, then came back to life. But something had changed. The shadow from earlier was back. This time it poured down the ladder from the attic like liquid tar, seeping and spreading across the floor. It wasn't like any shadow I'd ever seen. It was thick, viscous, like it wasn't just a lack of light but a presence, a thing, alive and hungry. It stopped at the foot of my bed where my sleeping form lay, still and unblinking. And then it paused. For a long moment, the figure just stood there. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. It was as though it was waiting for something. Waiting for me to do something, but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe either. I was paralyzed, my body locked in place as I watched the shadow draw closer. And then, just as the shadow loomed inches from the camera lens, the feed cut out completely. I sat there in the dark for what felt like hours, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't leave the apartment. I couldn't escape. But I knew one thing for sure. Whatever was in these walls, whatever was haunting this building, it wasn't going to stop, and it was watching me. Always watching. I couldn't escape. I tried. I really did. But the building kept me. Every door seemed to lead to another. Every hallway stretched farther than it should. The Holloway apartments weren't just a place, they were a maze. A twisting labyrinth of walls that knew more than they should, floors that sighed and groaned like they had stories to tell. And I felt like I was walking deeper into something that had been waiting for me, patiently. The knocking hadn't stopped. It was louder now, more insistent. As if it were right behind the walls, tapping, scraping, moving with purpose. Sometimes it came in regular intervals, like someone testing the strength of the plaster. Other times it was random, frantic, as though whatever was on the other side of those walls had no idea how to get out. The night of November 17th felt different, though. The temperature had dropped, and I could feel a chill settling over me. I'd been pacing around my apartment, my mind spiraling. I couldn't focus on anything anymore. Not the cameras, not the footage, not the growing list of strange occurrences. I just felt trapped. I decided to investigate the source of the noise, to confront whatever was causing it. I knew the building better now, at least I thought I did. I knew the creaks, the groans, the soft tapping of pipes in the walls. But this was something else. It wasn't the plumbing, it wasn't the house settling. It was deliberate. Went to the hallway first. The hallway with the narrow, dark passage that led to the laundry room and the old elevator shaft. The walls here were different from the rest of the building, thicker somehow, as if they were hiding something. I ran my fingers along the peeling wallpaper, tracing the faded floral patterns that seemed to spiral in on themselves the longer I stared at them. My eyes felt heavy, as if I were being pulled into the pattern, like it was trying to trap me in its endless loop. I shook my head and turned away, focusing on the air vent across from me. The hum I'd been hearing for days now was louder here. The low, guttural breathing that came from the vents, not mine, not human. It was something else. Something ancient. Something that shouldn't be able to breathe at all. I felt my throat tighten, a lump forming as I approached the vent. I kneeled down, my hand brushing the cold metal of the vent cover. It felt wrong, like the air around it was dense, heavy with something that wasn't meant to be there. I pried open the vent cover, the screech of the metal loud in the silence of the hallway. I peeked inside, half expecting to see nothing, just darkness and the dry smell of dust. But there was something in there. A shape, small and indistinct, wriggled in the shadows behind the mesh. A limb, twisted, elongated, too thin, like something that had been bent in ways it wasn't supposed to. It moved slowly as if it were aware of my presence, but it didn't stop. It just kept shifting, the scraping sound growing louder as it scraped against the metal. My heart thudded in my chest as I stepped back, my body tingling with the urge to flee. But I didn't. I couldn't. That's when I noticed something else. Crack in the wall. It wasn't large, just a small, almost imperceptible split in the plaster, but it was enough to catch my eye. It wasn't there before. I would have noticed it. I would have noticed if it had been. The crack ran the length of the wall, starting at the baseboard and rising up toward the ceiling. It wasn't just a crack, it was a seam. A thin, jagged line where the wall had been forced apart. Something was behind that wall. I could feel it. Pressed my palm against the wall, the cold plaster biting into my skin. My breath came in shallow gasps as I leaned closer, my face only inches away from the crack. I could hear the faintest sound coming from within, like breathing, low and wet, just like the sound in the vent. I reached for my phone, shaking hands, fumbling with the screen as I tried to pull up the camera app. I couldn't stop myself. I had to see. I had to know what was behind the wall. The camera's flash illuminated the crack for only a second, but it was enough. There, just beyond the plaster, was a figure, a face, thin, stretched, almost too smooth, like someone had taken the skin and pulled it, made it too tight. Its eyes were hollow black pits of darkness, no whites, just pure black, and its mouth was open wide in a silent scream. I gasped and stumbled back, my phone clattering to the floor. The noise echoed through the hallway, bouncing off the walls, and then silence. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The air felt thick, suffocating, pressing in on me from all sides. And then the tapping started again. But this time it wasn't just in the walls. It was coming from inside my own head. Tap, tap, tap. I couldn't get away. I was stuck here, in this building, in this apartment, with whatever was in the walls, whatever was watching me. The knocking grew louder. The walls themselves seemed to pulse like they were alive, like they were trying to break free. And then, for the first time since I'd come here, I heard a voice. But it wasn't mine. "Rent's due," it whispered. And I knew then, with a certainty, I couldn't explain, that the walls weren't just trapping me, they were feeding something. Feeding it with my fear, my confusion, my terror. It was waiting for me to break, to slip into the cracks and become a part of the building. I had to leave. I didn't care where I went or what happened to me. I just knew I had to get out of that apartment before it consumed me, before whatever was in the walls dragged me into the dark. But it was too late. The walls were already closing in. I don't remember packing. When I tried to think back, my mind was blurry, foggy, like something had clouded over it, as though I was trying to recall a dream that was slipping away, leaving behind only fragments. But I had to leave. I knew that much. The walls, those damn walls, were closing in on me. The shadow in the vent had followed me to the hallway. The crack in the plaster wasn't just a crack anymore. It was a wound in the building, something opening wider, spreading, trying to swallow me whole. I don't know how long I stood, there staring at the walls. The shadows had become heavier, more alive. The air was thick, oppressive. Even the light from the overhead bulb seemed to dim when I entered the hallway. The hall stretched longer, the dark corners swallowing any trace of daylight, like the building was pushing me deeper into itself. I wasn't sure where to go. My mind was racing, but it felt disconnected from my body, like I was watching someone else make the decisions. I grabbed what I could, my jacket, my phone, some clothes, that barely made it into the bag, and I was out the door. I didn't lock it, I didn't care. There was no point in trying to hold on to any of this. The Holloway apartments weren't just an old asylum. They were something else, something old and ancient, and I wasn't supposed to be here. I moved quickly through the building, barely stopping long enough to catch my breath, my heartbeat hammering in my chest. Every step I took, the walls seemed to pulse like they were alive, like they were following me. I could hear the scratching now, the frantic, desperate scrabble of claws against plaster behind the walls, under the floorboards. It wasn't just a noise anymore. It was a presence. The stairwell felt different too. The air was stale and cold, and the steps creaked under my weight. It was like the building was reacting to me, becoming more alive with each step I took, urging me to stay, to return to the apartment where it could trap me again. But I couldn't go back. I had to get out. The front door loomed ahead. Just a few more steps, just a few more. A voice, a low, guttural whisper that came from somewhere deep within the building, a sound that scraped against my bones. Leave, and you'll never be free. It hissed, but the voice didn't come from any single place. It was inside my head. It was everywhere, wrapping around me like chains. I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't turn around, didn't look back. I couldn't. I couldn't let myself listen to it. The door was just a few feet away. I reached for the handle and a hand grabbed my wrist. I jerked back, my heart leaping in my throat, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. But there was no one there. Just air. Empty space. I pulled my hand away, my fingers numb from the icy grip that hadn't been there. I reached for the door again, yanked it open with everything I had, and stepped. Outside, the fresh air hit me like a slap to the face. I hadn't realized how suffocating the inside of that building had been until I stepped outside. I breathed deep, filling my lungs with as much of the cold, clean air as I could. It felt like a small victory, a brief reprieve. But as I walked, away from the building, I could still feel it. That thing inside the walls. It wasn't gone. It was still there, watching, waiting. I wasn't free yet. I turned back once more just as I reached the end of the driveway, and there, in the third floor, window of the Holloway apartments, I saw them. 7 faces pressed against the glass, their eyes wide, unblinking, all fixed on me. All identical, all wearing the same expression. I froze. My chest tightened as the blood drained from my face. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The faces, they weren't just watching me. They were mimicking me, their eyes, their expressions. They were all the same, and I knew deep down that they weren't my reflection. They were something worse. Something trapped, just like I had been. And then, just as quickly as I saw them, the faces disappeared. The apartment building was silent. The windows were empty again. I took one more step back, unable to tear my eyes away from the spot where they had been. But nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. I turned and forced myself to walk away. My feet felt like they were moving on their own, carrying me farther and farther from the Holloway apartments, from Ravenswood, from all of it. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. I just knew I couldn't go back. And as I walked, my phone buzzed in my pocket, the screen flashing with a new message. It was from an unknown number. Don't forget about us. The message was followed by a picture of my own face pressed up against a window. One of the 7 faces. I dropped the phone, watching as it clattered to the ground, but the words were already burned into my brain. I don't know where I'm going next. Maybe it doesn't matter. The walls are still out there, still watching. They're never far behind. They'll find me. I couldn't outrun it. For the past several days I've been moving, always moving, hoping that distance would put some space between me and it. But now I know. It doesn't matter where I go. The walls are everywhere. The Holloway apartments weren't just a place, they were a portal, an opening, a rip in the fabric that connects the world we know to something much older, something far worse. And I brought it with me. I thought leaving Ravenswood would solve it. I thought leaving would give me the freedom to breathe again. But as I sat here in this dingy motel room, the yellowed lights flickering above me, the smell of damp carpet and cleaning supplies choking the air, I realized how wrong I was. When I first pulled away from the Holloway apartments, I felt a sense of relief, like I had escaped. The city of Ravenswood was small, suffocating. I thought the building was the source of all my nightmares. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized. It was never the building. It was always me. I'm the one that brought it. I'm the one who brought the walls with me. The second night in the motel was when I first started hearing it again. The tapping. The tapping that had been inside the walls of my old apartment, but now it was here, in the corners of the room. At first I thought it was just the pipes, the way old buildings creak and groan. But no, the sound was too deliberate, too rhythmic. Tap. 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 Then the scratching started like something or someone was trying to claw its way out from behind the walls. It echoed through the room. In the quiet moments before sleep, I would hear it, the low guttural rasp that was unmistakable, the wet, clicking sound that seemed to drip with malice. It was the same sound I had heard from the vent at the Holloway apartments, the sound that haunted my every dream, that crawled through my waking moments, clinging to me like a disease. I couldn't run from it anymore. The thing that had been in the walls of Holloway had followed me, and now it had found me, here, in this room. The walls were alive with it, and I knew it was waiting. I moved to the window, desperate for a glimpse of the outside world, anything to break the tension, to remind myself there was still something real out there. I pulled the curtain back and looked down at the parking lot. My heart stopped in my chest. There, standing by the old rusted motel sign, was a figure, a man, or something that looked like a man, tall and thin, his arms too long, hanging loosely at his sides. His face was hidden by the shadows, but I knew instantly what I was seeing. The same twisted, distorted figure I had seen in the Holloway window. The same man that had been inside the walls. The Watcher. I didn't move. I couldn't. My body was frozen, as if the sight of that figure had paralyzed me. The man, if he was even a man, wasn't just standing there, he was waiting. His presence was suffocating, like he was just one more wall between me and the world I used to know. A reminder that I had crossed a line I could never uncross. Then, without warning, he raised his hand and placed it against the glass. A perfect, smooth handprint appeared where his fingers pressed. The same handprint I had seen in the bathroom mirror at the Holloway apartments. The same mark that I had found on the walls of my old apartment, as though something had been trying to reach out from behind the surface. I stumbled backward, my legs shaking. The walls, they were closing in. I could feel them tightening, squeezing, pushing in from all sides. I could hear the clicking now, not just in the walls, but in my head. They're coming for you. There was no way out. I knew that. Now, the door was locked, but it didn't matter. The walls were already inside. The thing inside the walls had crawled into me. It wasn't just a house anymore. It wasn't just a building. I was the one who had opened the door. I was the one who had let them in. The tapping started again, louder, this time. The walls were closing in on me. It's too late. I could feel something moving behind the drywall. Something pressing, pushing, straining against the plaster. The shadows twisted in the corners, and I could hear the wet clicking. That horrible, unmistakable sound growing louder. It wasn't just in the walls anymore. It was coming from inside me. I could feel it. I reached up and touched my face. My skin was crawling. My body wasn't my own anymore. In the corner of my eye, I saw something move. The figure outside the window was gone, but the walls weren't empty. They had found me, and they were coming through. The room began to spin, and the walls I had tried to escape, collapsed inward. The last thing I heard before the darkness swallowed me was the sound of my own voice. But it wasn't my voice anymore. It was the voice of something else, something older. Rent's due, and then, nothing. I'd heard the rumors about the Redmire foundry long before I was assigned to inspect it. The town of Blackwater was a dying relic of the Rust Belt. Faded factory buildings, empty streets, and whispers in the dark about things that should never be talked about. The foundry was the crown jewel of those whispers, the one place that everyone avoided, even in a town that had learned to live in the shadow of decay. I wasn't supposed to be here. I was supposed to be inspecting an old warehouse down the road, but my supervisor had called me in last minute. They needed someone with my experience, an industrial safety inspector who wasn't easily rattled. So when the call came through that Redmeyer needed a visit, I didn't question it. The truth was I'd been in worse places. A little rust, some old equipment, nothing I couldn't handle. The smell hit me first as I stepped through the rusted gates of the foundry. Molten metal, but not the clean metallic scent I was used to. No, this was something different, something thick, cloying, like burnt flesh mixed with sour, spoiled meat. My stomach churned as I adjusted my flashlight, the beam cutting through, the grime on the walls. I'd read the reports, of course. The foundry had been closed in 1987 after 37 workers mysteriously disappeared during a night shift. The official story was that there had been a gas leak, that the workers had suffocated, but that didn't explain why their paychecks had been found in their lockers, or the coffee mugs that had still been steaming when the rescue teams arrived. The town never bought the story. Some of them still swore the workers never left, that they still punched in every night. I didn't know what I was expecting to find. Maybe a decrepit factory, long abandoned with nothing more than echoes and dust. But as I walked deeper into the building, I felt an odd sensation, a prickling on the back of my neck, a feeling that I wasn't alone even though I knew I was. The main office was locked, but I managed to find a spare key. Inside, the old time cards were still in their rack. They had yellowed with age, but their edges were strangely pristine, like they hadn't been disturbed in decades. I picked up a few, examining the names. None of them familiar to me, but they all had the same end date marked on them. October 29th, 1987. I shivered. The air was thick, like the walls were holding on to something. I turned to the security monitors, mounted on the wall, half covered in dust. The faint glow of the screens flickered to life, and I froze. There, on the screen, was a shadow slumped over one of the furnaces. I couldn't make out any details. It was like the shadow was absorbing the light, stretching unnaturally across the screen. My pulse quickened, but I told myself it was just a trick of the old equipment, a glitch. But as I moved closer to the furnace, I noticed that the door was open. Wide open. I hadn't touched it. In fact, I hadn't even seen it move. Inside the furnace, something glistened. I wasn't sure if I should investigate or walk away. I mean, I had a job to do, this was an inspection. But curiosity gnawed at me, a steady pull in my gut. I stepped forward, the sound of my boots echoing through the cavernous space. My flashlight beam hit the furnace, and I saw the glint of something metal, something sharp, but it was too dark to make out details. I reached out to touch the furnace door, but before I could, a sound, soft, almost imperceptible, came from behind me. The light flickered again. Then nothing, just silence. I turned back toward the office, feeling a twinge of unease settle deep in my chest. I'd been in worse situations before, abandoned warehouses, unsafe construction sites, but this felt different. The moment I reached the doorway of the security office, I heard it, light but unmistakable, knocking. Not the kind of knocking that comes from a door, but the rhythmic tap, tap, tap of something tapping against the metal walls. I froze. My heart thundered in my chest. The knocking stopped. My mouth was dry. I felt the need to run, to get the hell out of there, but I couldn't. There was something pulling me back, something strange and insistent. It wasn't just the knocking. It was the way the air felt heavier in the room. The way the shadows seemed to stretch in the corners of my eyes, the whisper of a name, my name. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of fear that was clouding my thoughts. But the moment I stepped into the hallway, I knew I wasn't alone anymore. The tapping had started again, and this time I swore I could hear something, someone, breathing, just behind the walls. A low, rasping sound, like a whisper, but too distant to make out the words. I forced myself to move, heading back toward the exit, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, watching me, the sensation of eyes on my back. I rushed through the crumbling halls, reaching the front doors. When I pushed them open, I breathed in the crisp, cold air like I had just surfaced from underwater. But when I glanced back, I saw it. In the window, Above the front door, a face. It was pale and featureless, eyes wide, mouth open in what could have been a scream, but it was silent. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. I didn't waste any more time. I left the building behind, the doors slamming shut behind me, but as I drove away, something gnawed at me. The undeniable feeling that the foundry was still awake, still waiting, and that I had just met its welcoming committee. The sun had barely risen by the time I left the Redmire foundry, my mind still spinning from the night before. The smell of metal and burnt rubber clung to me, even after I changed into fresh clothes. But it wasn't just the factory that haunted me. The shadows in the corners of my mind refused to leave. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd missed something, that I hadn't seen everything I needed to see. I tried to tell myself I was just tired, exhausted even. The past few days had been a blur of paperwork, inspections, and deadlines. It was easy to rationalize away what I'd seen. An old building, strange shadows, nothing more than the quirks of a dying factory. But as I sat at my desk, staring at the notes I'd taken the day before, I couldn't help but feel like I was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. The thing that kept running through my mind was the time card rack. The fact that the cards were all still there, yellowed with age but untouched. I had inspected them closely before leaving, but there was one thing that had bothered me, one detail that I had missed the first time. The cards were arranged perfectly, in a neat row, all marked with the same end date, October 29th, 1987. That's not unusual, I thought. They were just the last day the factory had been in operation, the day the workers had vanished. But as I studied the cards again, I noticed something strange. One card was slightly out of place, slightly turned at an odd angle. The name on the card was smudged, but I could make out the faint letters. The name was familiar. Miller. It hit me like a ton of bricks. The name was on the list of workers who'd disappeared, a name I'd seen in the town records. But why was his card still there, in the rack? I tried to push the thought aside. There was no point in getting obsessed over small details. But something about it lingered. That evening, I went back to the foundry. The sun was setting as I parked in front of the decaying building, the air thick with the rusted scent of old machinery. I had no real reason to return, just the nagging feeling that I needed to see it again. This time I didn't bother with the main doors. Instead, I slipped around the back past the rusted dumpsters and cracked pavement. The side entrance was easier to get into. I had the key card from my inspection, and I knew I wouldn't be disturbed. Inside, everything was quiet. Too quiet. The hum of the machines that I had heard yesterday was gone, leaving only the faint creak of the building settling. The faint smell of metal was still there, but now it had a bitter, stale edge to it, like something had died inside the factory long ago. I headed straight for the office where I'd seen the time cards. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness. As I walked down the hall, the sound of my boots muffled by the thick dust on the floor. As I entered the room, I was greeted by the same rows of equipment, the same monitors flickering with static. The time card rack was still where it had been, but now something felt different. The card for Miller was gone. I felt my stomach tighten. There had been no one here since I left. I hadn't seen anyone. So where had the card gone? I walked over to the desk, my fingers shaking as I picked up the last remaining time card. I turned it over. The name was unfamiliar, but the date was the same. October 29th, 1987. But the card was unnaturally fresh, almost like it had just been punched. I could feel my heart beating faster now, the air growing heavier with every passing second. This was wrong. It wasn't just the factory, it was something inside it, something I wasn't supposed to see. I dropped the card and stepped back, my flashlight shaking in my hand. That's when I heard it again, the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and they were coming from behind me. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there, just the emptiness of the room. Then, the PA system crackled to life. The same distorted voice from the night before. Vasquez to Station 9. Last warning. I froze. The voice had come from nowhere. The sound was clear, too clear, and it echoed in my chest like a distant drumbeat. I had no idea what Station 9 was. There wasn't any Station 9 in the factory, at least not that I had seen. But I knew I had to go. I started moving toward the door, my footsteps quick and uneven. The shadows seemed to follow me, stretching across the floor as I moved. My skin prickled, and for a moment I thought I heard whispers, soft, unintelligible murmurs. But the words didn't make sense. They didn't sound like they were coming from anyone in the room. When I reached the door, I was struck by the sudden realization that it wasn't opening. The handle refused to turn, as if something was blocking it from the other side. I tugged at it, pulling with all my strength, but the door remained firmly shut. That's when I heard it again, the click of the clock. A rhythmic, steady sound, like the ticking of an old watch. AM, and that's when the factory came to life. The lights flared on all at once, blinding me for a moment. The sound of machinery grinding and creaking filled the air, so loud that it seemed to vibrate the walls. The conveyor belts jerked to life, moving at a breakneck pace, and the furnaces rumbled in response, their lights flickering with a deep, unnatural glow. I didn't know what was happening. I couldn't understand it. All I knew was that I needed to get out, but there was no way out. Every door was sealed shut, every window bolted tight. The voice crackled over the PA system again, sending a shiver down my spine. Vasquez to Station 9. Last warning. I turned to see the shadow in the corner. A tall, lanky figure, its features distorted by the dim light. It stood motionless, but I could feel it staring at me, waiting. I reached for my phone to call for help, but my hands were trembling so badly that I could barely hold it. The screen flickered, the numbers scrambling into static. A sudden realization hit me then. This was no longer an inspection. This was something else entirely. Something I couldn't control. Something far older than the factory. The air grew colder. The walls seemed to close in, and I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching from behind. And then, the power went out. The darkness of Redmire Foundry was absolute. The only light now was from the flickering emergency bulbs, casting weak shadows that twisted and writhed along the walls. The deafening roar of the machinery had stopped, replaced by a hollow silence that pressed against my ears. My heart pounded, so hard that it felt like it was going to burst. I could barely hear the sound of my own breath. Every instinct screamed for me to leave, to run as fast as I could and never look back, but I was trapped. The door was still locked. The windows bolted shut. It was like I had stumbled into a place where time itself had lost all meaning, where the factory was frozen in a moment before or after something terrible. And then a chilling realization sank in. I wasn't alone. I took a hesitant step backward, trying to steady my breathing. My flashlight beam trembled in my hand as I scanned the room. There was movement in the distance, shadows flickering along the edges of the furnaces. I couldn't be sure, but I thought I saw a figure standing by one of the machines, its form long and gaunt, like a man bent too far out of shape. Vasquez to Station 9. Last warning. The voice came over the PA again. The same distorted, mechanical tone as before, but this time there was a presence behind it. A weight. I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I tried the door once more. It wouldn't budge. I moved down the hallway toward the security office, the hallway now stretching longer than I remembered. The walls felt like they were closing in around me. I was suffocating in the stillness, the silence pressing at my throat like invisible hands. The security office was where I'd seen the time cards before. I needed to get to the footage. Maybe if I could understand what had happened here, if I could just see what was truly going on, I could figure out a way to escape. I reached the office and pushed open the door, the hinges creaking loudly in the quiet of the factory. The monitors were still on, flickering with static, but as I approached the desk, one of them cleared for just a moment. For a split second, the screen showed a figure, tall, shadowed, and far too wide for a human. It was standing at the base of furnace number 7, its back to me. And then, just as quickly, the screen flickered and returned to static. I grabbed the mouse and clicked on the playback, trying to fast forward through the footage. But the timestamps didn't match. The footage was fragmented, jumping from moments of absolute stillness to fast-forwarded chaos like a bad VHS tape skipping. It was impossible to make sense of it, but then I saw it. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the factory's lights blazed to life on the screen, blinding in their intensity. The machines started humming again, their massive gears slowly turning with an ominous groan. Figures began moving between the stations, their movements jerky and unnatural. They weren't walking, they were gliding. Like marionettes on invisible strings, their limbs jerking in mechanical synchronization. I froze, my pulse quickening. The figures were wearing the same coveralls, the same uniforms, the same burnt orange fabric that had been worn by the workers, who had vanished all those years ago. And then I noticed something else. There were more of them. Many more. Not just the 37 workers who had disappeared, but something else. Something older. The camera's focus shifted, showing the shadowy figure from before, its outline stretching unnaturally tall, impossibly thin. It moved from station to station, flickering between the monitors like an image caught in a strobe light. It was as if the figure was stepping in and out of time itself, appearing only for a second and then disappearing, leaving behind nothing but a faint after-image in my mind. I backed away from the monitor, my breath catching in my throat. What the hell was I looking at? Who, or what, were these figures? And why were they here? Before I could move, a voice echoed out from the PA system again. Vasquez to Station 9. Last warning. The coldness in the voice had escalated. There was an urgency now, an undertone of something that wasn't just mechanical. It was alive, and I knew instinctively that it was no longer a warning. It was a command. I tried to ignore the voice. I tried to think, to rationalize it away. But the lights flickered again. The room suddenly felt colder, the air thick with the scent of metal and something sour. The walls seemed to be pressing in closer, the faint sound of machinery groaning in the background. I could hear the faint click of footsteps, soft but deliberate, coming from behind me. I turned, my flashlight darting across the room. There was nothing there, except for the door to furnace number 7. It had opened. The door was wide, enough that I could see the darkness inside, the shadows lingering like something was waiting for me. I could hear it now, the low, guttural sound of something shifting in the dark. Vasquez to Station 9. The voice was louder now, its tone sharp, commanding. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to get out. I needed to escape before whatever was waiting for me in that factory came for me. I turned and ran. My feet slapped against the cold concrete floor, my heart pounding in my chest. The hall seemed longer than I remembered, the shadows growing deeper and more oppressive with each step. And then the PA system came alive one more time. Vasquez to Station 9. Last warning. And this time, I heard the footsteps. Real footsteps, not echoes, not static. The sound of boots crunching against the floor, quick and deliberate. I was no longer running alone. I could feel it behind me, breathing. And then, as I reached the door, I slammed into it, my hand fumbling for the handle. It wouldn't budge. The door was locked. I was trapped. The footsteps stopped. The factory fell silent. I took a shaky breath, my eyes darting around for any escape. But before I could move, the shadows in the corner of the room shifted, stretching outward, wrapping themselves around me. The PA system crackled once more. Vasquez to Station 9, last warning. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The lights flickered, and for a split second, the factory was plunged back into darkness. That's when I felt it. A hand. Cold. Wet. Grabbing my shoulder. The light of dawn had barely begun to leak into the factory windows as I stood there, my back pressed against the cold metal door. The breath in my chest was shallow, each exhale shaky as I gripped the handle and tried once again to force the door open. My fingers, slick with sweat, slid uselessly over the cold metal. It was as if the building itself was alive, aware of my desperation and unwilling to let me escape. The silence stretched around me, thick and suffocating. Even the faint hum of machinery, which had been buzzing ever so slightly in the background, had quieted. There was nothing left but the sound of my pulse pounding in my ears and the relentless weight of fear pressing against my chest. I could still feel the pressure of that hand on my shoulder, cold, clammy, its grip tightening like it was trying to drag me back into the shadows of Furnace No. 7. I yanked the door again, my breath hitching. Nothing. It was locked. Of course, it was locked. I turned away from the door, my eyes darting across the room. Everything looked the same. The factory was still the same decaying monstrosity it had been when I first arrived. The floors slick with oil and grime, the piles of rusted scrap metal scattered like forgotten corpses. Nothing had changed. But then I saw something else. A figure standing in the distance, almost blending into the shadows. A tall, angular shape. Too tall, too thin to be human. It moved, and for a second I thought my vision had gone blurry, but no. It wasn't a trick of the light. The figure was real. It was moving toward me. I froze. I couldn't move. The fear was paralyzing. The room felt like it was closing in. My heart was in my throat, every muscle in my body screaming to run, but I couldn't. The figure stopped just a few feet away, its outline flickering in and out of existence like a bad signal on a broken TV. I could hear it now, its breath, labored and wet, like it was struggling to inhale. The sound was wrong, so wrong that it made my stomach churn. Vasquez to Station 9. Last warning. The voice, distorted, filled the room. It wasn't coming from the PA this time. It was right, there in front of me. I could feel it vibrating in my bones. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run. But I stood there frozen, my legs like lead. The figure raised its arm and I saw it. The hand. Long fingers. Too long, too thin. They reached toward me, the nails yellow and jagged, dripping with something dark and sticky. It moved slowly, deliberately, as if savoring the moment. The final confrontation. The air grew thick with something metallic, like blood or rust, and the smell. It was suffocating. The factory's familiar stench of oil and chemicals had morphed into something unbearable, a mixture of decay and iron that made me gag. I could feel the temperature drop. It was like the life was draining out of the room, the heat evaporating, leaving only the cold, a cold that sunk into my bones and froze me in place. I tried to speak, but no words came. My mouth was dry, my throat tight, as if something was constricting around my neck. The figure was getting closer. Its eyes, if you could even call them eyes, were dark, black voids. They didn't reflect light. They didn't look human at all, and then I saw something I hadn't noticed before. The factory, the machines, the conveyors, they weren't just stationary anymore. They were alive, slowly creaking into motion. The lights flickered, flashing on and off in a frantic rhythm, like they were struggling against something. I turned to the control panel, desperately looking for any kind of way to shut everything down, to stop the machines from starting up, to stop whatever was happening from progressing. I slammed my hand down on the emergency shutoff switch. Nothing. I hit it again. Still nothing. The lights blinked again, and then, just as suddenly as the factory had come to life, it all stopped. The machines ground to a halt, the lights dimmed to a flickering red glow, and the air went unnaturally still. I didn't know what had happened. Was I imagining it? Was this the last vestige of my sanity slipping away? But then I heard it. Louder now, as if the air itself had become a funnel for the sound. The click-clack of boots, too many boots moving in sync. The shadows moved. More figures, taller, more distorted than the first, stepped into view, their forms flickering in and out of focus. They weren't human, not anymore. They were like the ones I had seen in the footage, dressed in those same burnt coveralls, their limbs jerking unnaturally as they glided toward me. They were coming for me. They were coming for my soul. The PA system crackled to life once more. Vasquez to Station 9, last warning. This time it wasn't just a voice. This time, it was a command. The figures lunged. I turned, adrenaline coursing through my veins, my body acting on instinct. I ran. I ran without thinking, my feet pounding against the cold factory floor. I could hear them behind me, their steps heavy, deliberate, unrelenting. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. There was no exit. There were no doors. The factory had swallowed me whole. I reached the window. My hand slammed against the glass, but it wouldn't break. It wouldn't give. I turned, my chest heaving, my body screaming for relief. And that's when I saw it. The shadow. The one from before. It stood just beyond the factory's entrance, waiting for me. I ran again, but this time I wasn't running from the figures. I wasn't running from the machines or the sound of the PA. I was running from the shadow that had followed me all this time. I had only one choice. I had to escape. I had to get out. And then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me, echoing through the dark, empty factory. I didn't stop. Not until I reached the hole in the fence. I crawled through it, dragging myself to safety. But even as I did, I heard the PA system crackle one last time. Vasquez to Station 9. The words echoed in my mind, haunting me even as I fled. And then I saw them. The time cards. The same time cards that had been scattered across the factory floor earlier, now neatly arranged in front of me. The last date on every single card? Today. I looked up. The shadow was still there watching. And then I knew. It would never stop. They would find me again. I hadn't slept. Not really. Maybe a few minutes here or there, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. Those burnt coveralls, the twisted forms, the blackened eyes that seemed to burn through my mind. I could still hear the echo of their footsteps, always following, always waiting. I sat at my desk in my tiny apartment, staring at the computer screen. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, the words sitting heavy in my mind. Final inspection. Report. Redmire Foundry condition, condemned. Recommendations, demolition. That was it. That was the truth, the one I was supposed to deliver. It should have been easy. The factory was dangerous, structurally unsound, filled with years of decay. The machines hadn't run in over 3 decades, and the place was riddled with broken windows, rusted steel, and mold. It was a death trap, both in the literal and metaphorical sense. But the truth wasn't that simple, was it? The truth was more than just the building's decaying foundation. It was the pulse that still thrummed through the walls, the unspeakable events that haunted the place like a living thing. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the words on the screen. I had to finish it. I had to write the report, submit it, and get out. But the words weren't enough. They couldn't capture what I'd seen, what I'd felt. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I suddenly felt it again. The weight of the room, the oppressive silence pressing in from all sides. I wasn't alone. I glanced at the clock, 7:46 m. A minute had passed, and it felt like 100. I needed to get out. I needed to put this behind me. But how? How could I leave when every time I closed my eyes I saw the factory? How could I leave when I knew the shadow was still out there, waiting? I stood abruptly, knocking my chair back as I headed for the door. The air in my apartment felt too still, too quiet. I reached for the door handle, my pulse racing in my throat. But just before I touched it, I heard something. A soft click. My heart froze in my chest. It was the sound of a time card machine, the rhythmic tapping of metal on metal, the sound of someone punching in. I turned toward the source, my breath caught in my throat. The sound wasn't coming from the time card machine in the corner of the room. It was coming from the hallway outside, faint but unmistakable. I forced myself to move, my legs shaking beneath me as I walked to the door and opened it. The hallway was empty, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the smell. That same smell from the factory. the sharp, metallic tang of burnt oil and decay. It was in the air, thick and suffocating. My eyes watered, and I took a step back, slamming the door behind me. I wasn't safe here. I realized that now. I hadn't been safe since the moment I stepped into that factory. The time cards. I remembered the time cards scattered across the floor. Of the factory, the ones with the last date circled in bold red ink. Today. It wasn't just the workers that had vanished that night. The factory itself had taken something that wouldn't ever let go. Those workers, they hadn't just disappeared into thin air. They had become part of the factory, part of its machinery, part of its soul, and now it was coming for me. I rushed to my computer again, my fingers trembling as I typed out my final report. I had to finish it, had to get it out of my hands before it was too late. Final report. Redmire Foundry condition. Condemned. Recommendations. Demolition. Warning. Do not enter. It felt like a last confession. The truth that had been haunting me for days, no longer buried, no longer hidden. I hit send. But as soon as I did, the screen flickered. For a moment I thought the computer had crashed, but no. It was something else. Something that wasn't part of the program. The cursor blinked, and then the words appeared one by one. You brought it with you. The message flashed across the screen, the words burning into my retinas like a brand. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't some glitch. It was them. They were here. They had followed me, just like the shadow in the factory had followed me, and they had made their way into my life, into my home. I reached for my phone, my hands shaking as I tried to dial 911, but the screen went black before I could hit send. There was no more escape. And then, I heard it. The familiar sound of footsteps, the same rhythmic thud of boots on the factory floor. But now it wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from my bedroom. I turned slowly, dread seeping into every bone of my body. The door was ajar, just enough for me to see the dark outline of something standing in the doorway. I knew what it was before I even saw it. The tall figure in the burnt coveralls, the black void where its eyes should have been. And the smell, it hit me all over again. That iron metallic stench, the cold that swept through the room, freezing me to the spot. Vasquez. It whispered my name, and I felt its cold fingers on my skin, the chill creeping in, freezing me. In place, I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. I was trapped. And the last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me whole was the flash of time cards scattered across the floor. Dozens of them. All with the same last date. Today, the factory had claimed me.